now and then.
We're live.
Where Aramine was frustrated and she'd go, "Damn it, I want some dick."
Those are the best moments. It's the most honest.
And the whole room would fall silent, and we'd be like, "Oh my."
Aramine's entertaining Flat Earth.
Oh,
yes,
my.
I saw that too. I didn't. Well, she's okay. Well, I want to talk about this later. But anyway, we have the Maute here.
Sorry.
Yeah, that hurt my soul.
Did mine too.
Go do the monster Maute.
Really? It was AIDS to your ears?
Yes, and I sent Maute a message. I said, "This is AIDS." I think I said auditory AIDS. I think that's the way I phrased it.
Was audio AIDS.
Yeah.
One word at a time.
Yeah.
This was audio AIDS.
Yeah. Just so you like.
I didn't see it until the very last one where I just saw AIDS. I was like, did Drag want me to bring up AIDS to Kent Hovind? Like, what the?
I mean, he was in prison, but still. Like...
Hello. This is Kent Hovind. I was born at a very young age. I've been circumcised, baptized, Parkerized, vulcanized.
He literally said some shit like that. We were like, what are you saying?
That was the happiest interview I've had in such a long time. I loved that interview because it was like all of his hits.
You did a great job.
Of the greatest hits of the essential Kent Hovind. And he wants to hang out again, so fuck yeah.
So what inspired you to have this undertaking? Like something had to have clicked where you went, you know what? I don't like myself very much. So let me put myself in this very odd scenario.
Yeah, so things haven't been going well, and it was a choice between slamming my balls into a drawer, reviewing Kent Hovind, and trying to work my Neo-avoiding bullets matrix magic.
So why did you choose the worst option?
Why is it the worst option?
It could be.
That was one of my favorite interviews I've ever done. That was Kent motherfucking Hovind. To sit down and chat with the Hove. That's why I did it. Because and also he's a little crazy. A little bit more.
That is an understatement.
I was hoping to talk a little bit more about the ideas of conspiracy and stuff like that, but I'm glad I planted some seeds because I don't know if anybody has followed Kent the way that I have, but in the early days, in addition to his Creation Science Ministries videos, he would have other videos that had to do with very conspiratorial topics that kind of touch on sovereign citizen kind of topics, survivalist, don't trust the government, the Federal Trade Commission is corrupt, news and education are propaganda, Illuminati. Like he has some videos on some deeply conspiratorial stuff. So I'm kind of hoping to open that up in future discussions and see where this idea of creation science fits into the context of a conspiratorial mind. That's my long game. Oh no! I am not. Psychoanalysis is specifically Freudian. I'm doing nothing of the sort.
True. Trying to find out what makes him tick.
Well, I mean, it's that's a job for a psychiatrist of some sort, maybe some medication. But I think his need for attention is really what's interesting, because he can't help but to throw jabs at people. Like the more, I guess, legitimate a person is, the more he feels compelled to denigrate them, but not overtly. There's always these little tacit attacks on their background or their education, and to try and delegitimize them as much as he can throughout the conversation. So
he's good at throwing bombs, like a drive-by insults.
Yes,
he roll off his tongue.
Yeah, no, that's a pretty good example of it, and it's very passive aggressive. It's very, because you know, and as the master of passive aggressive, you know, we definitely saw you return certain certain jabs, such as your comment about him going away.
Mm-hmm.
An obvious reference to his incarceration.
Talked about that beforehand. He said it was okay for me to mention, to dwell on, and I assured him that it was okay because I think that's the least interesting thing about Ken Hovind.
Yeah,
it does dip into a little conspiratorial thinking, and that's the part that is interesting to me. But like litigating that whole thing, yeah.
No, we'll save that for people who are interested in that, like MP, since that seems to be a hot topic between the two. If you hadn't known, Ken Hovind actually made a video response to MP concerning his incarceration and conviction.
Who's MP?
Oh, Nate Brody.
Oh yeah, Nate.
Yeah. He's going by his real name now, so yeah, that's an interesting side. I didn't think that he'd actually respond to him, but I don't know. Maybe those two will have a conversation one day concerning the legal aspects of that. But like I said, I do agree that that's less interesting. I did notice that when you asked him,
that would be like he thinks that he's right. Like, so what is the goal of showing him that he's wrong? Do you think that you're going to change his mind?
Oh,
do you think that you're going to be? Do you think that you have the fucking magic power of persuasion to change Kent Hovind's mind in real time? Like, and that's genuinely what I think some of these assholes that keep debating him think. Oh, I got it. I got the one. The defeater argument. No, you don't, motherfucker. This guy is a narcissist. Wait. Nobody is persuasive. The hand of motherfucking God could come down and touch him on the forehead, and he would be critical of it.
Oh yeah, I agree.
You know, like, come on.
I definitely agree.
Make it a debate format.
Well, one of the things that I found, just kind of in my personal life, is that even though I don't consider him an educator, I don't consider him actually educated. We know where he actually got his education from, if you even want to call it that, and it's a travesty to even remotely consider it such. So there are people in real time, in real life, that believe that he is legitimate, and these people, are regular folks who work a 9 to 5, and who just so happen to have some very, very similar beliefs, and it ends up misinforming them. My personal experience is that an old coworker of mine back when I used to work the retail was, he is a younger guy, younger creationist, Christian evangelical, and he was discussing some of his influences because I started noticing that he would trot up Pratt in the middle of our conversations at work, and some of them sounded really, really familiar, but I did not want to name drop any creationists in order to to give them more advertisement than they already have. But all of a sudden he says that, oh yeah, I was listening to this radio show, and Dr. Ken Hovind was on there, and man, he's a great guy, really smart, educated guy. You should look him up sometimes. And of course my eyes roll in the back of my head, and I started asking him, like, what do you actually know about his education? Well, he has a PhD. I said, does he now? Have you seen it? Have you seen his thesis at any point in time? Have you seen his research or anything? No. And so I go through and explain that Kent Hovind's education is a sham. Like, he got his degree out of a trailer, in the middle of bumfuck nowhere. And so it took about a week or so for me to kind of show this guy that the person that he claims has so much education, a person that I could learn from, has less education than me, and is less informed, and is less honest than I am. And that was an interesting process, because I had kind of, I guess, fooled myself into thinking that Ken Hovind's reach was only internet deep, with a few exceptions, such as the people who give him property. But no, I think the focus should be on the people that believe
he toured constantly. He toured before there was the internet. All of those PowerPoint slides he used to do on a legit of slides to churches, and do the same fucking thing.
Not just churches, but schools.
Of course, yes. he's a pro. And that was, I mean, at the very beginning of the interview, I conceded that while I didn't like the content of what he was saying, by which he presented it was fascinating, right? He speaks in plain language. In one sentence, he will make it seem apparent 6 different things that aren't true. Somebody who's trying to debate him, you're left with choosing which of the 6 things you want to disprove, and then you get stuck in the weeds because then he'll start splitting hairs on any one of those, and you don't get to the other 5. He's so fucking good at it.
Well, Hugh Ross. Hugh Ross took him apart on the Anchor Till show, eh?
That was an older one, right?
Yeah, it's an older one. They're sitting up on a stage.
Which just the 2 of them.
It's only one topic. Like that's the thing. Is actually this is I'm not trying to be uncharitable to William Lane Craig here, but there is a in terms of technique. There's a comparable thing there in the sense that William Lane Craig's technique is that he throws out a ton of arguments, and you never get to actually address each of them one by one.
As well.
Exactly, and if you watch his debates on like single topics, so watch his resurrection. The best example is his resurrection debate with Bart Ehrman, where like he basically just resorts to preaching at the end of the debate, because Ehrman just just dismantles him. But it's because if you focus on one thing, that technique does not work.
I don't think my
Did you get yours, Gus?
Yep. I don't think my boundless love for Maute would be sufficient if I didn't once again state that he took on like 3 pre-suppers at once and whooped them all.
Gus is my biggest cheerleader. I love it. Tell me more about my eyes, Gus. This is great.
I'll tell you about Colin Pierce's eyes as they just got tighter and tighter. Yeah, he was getting madder and madder at you. Oh man, but you didn't let it affect you.
One thing that I noticed about Kent, and it did feel like the energy at about the 40-minute mark, the energy was kind of up, and he seemed to be really defensive in a way that I changed topics. I tried to bring it to something that kind of brought the energy back down because I didn't want it to get heated.
Didn't want to pop a stroke.
Did notice that there were certain points where, like, when Crossroads, he would just claim victory. Weird, like that's not how this works.
He was trying to be combative at certain points, just openly combative with you over a point that you really haven't even made.
Oh, I kept finding things to agree with him on. That was my pre-planned strategy, and there was plenty. Like, you want to critique science? Rock on, man. I will tell you all the things that I think are legitimate critiques against science. The ones that you're saying aren't the ones that I would use, right? Or, oh, you think science communication and literacy is awesome? Right on, man. We're on the same page. We are both cheerleaders for that. So now that we know that we agree on, what do we disagree on? That was sometimes a little bit. He was very difficult to redirect because, as I mentioned in the hang, I wanted him to be able to get his shtick out. Like, I didn't want to have to cut him off every time he went into shtick. And I know that that's frustrating from a listening perspective. It's frustrating from a perspective. But I thought it was legitimate, like letting him get his piece out without being interrupted. Cool, right? And then towards the end, he was using it in a way that I didn't think was as valuable. So I started challenging him a little bit. Like, I would let him go and go and go and go. And then at the end, I would ask, what does that mean? Let's imagine that is true. How does that help? So I wanted to make sure that he felt listened to, but also point out, like, this seems like a super inconsequential point in the bigger picture. I mean, because once again, I'm not gonna rope a dope with him. I just don't see value in that.
No.
Now, Maute, actually, let me make sure I got the right.
It sounds like a serious question setup.
All right, wait, say it again.
Sounds like a setup to a serious question.
Yes. So, you and I have had quite a few discussions, publicly and off air, and during Pillow Talk about your view on science communication. And you have two models, right? You have what you call the deficit model, and then you have an alternative to the deficit model. After speaking to Kent Hovind, are you more affirmed in your preferred position, or are you reevaluating it? And briefly go over those two so people who are watching know exactly what we're talking about.
That's a great question. So this is going to take a hot second, so allow me to try to bumper sticker.
Now, I want you to talk a lot so I can play this game.
I see what you just fucking did. All right. So yeah, you set me up to fucking prattle on.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So here's how this works. So in communicating science, you can either take an approach that is called the deficit model, which pretty much is implying, oh, the reason why you think that is because there is a deficit in your understanding of science or this topic of science. Allow me to fulfill that deficit, understand it correctly like I do. Right? That's the deficit model. I'm explaining it in a bit of a snarky way, but the way that they do. What can you agree on? What can you agree to disagree on without it turning combative? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And sometimes in building a relationship and a rapport with somebody, you become somebody that can persuade them should you choose to. And even if you should choose not to, if you're somebody that they can relate to, and they're somebody that you can relate to, it's going to change the way that you speak to each other. And just by familiarity, certain ideas of each other, should you express them to each other often enough and discuss them, are going to evolve between the two of you, right? So, and that's, once again, I am not somebody who wants to persuade per se. I want to persuade you not to persuade. You want to be a dick about it. So those are the two options. After today, I mean, if I wanted to fulfill my narcissistic tendencies, I would think that my interview with Kent Hovind today demonstrated how awesome the non-deficit model is. Because if I had approached him with the deficit model, it would have been the shit show that every other debate with Kent Hovind is. That goes nowhere.
And I'm actually inclined to agree with you. Just look at the individuals that I've spoken to literally for years. And I can tell you that as I've gone through the years, as I've matriculated through school, I've learned a whole lot over the last 8-9 years. But even though I've presented this information to the same people, I've moved none of them, not a one. So there is something different. I know, and it has to do with an epistemology. A perfect example, if anyone's watched the Three Black Heathens show, I explained to a young convert of the Black Hebrew Israelitism religion thing, whatever, that his belief in the 12 tribes of Noah and him being related to one of them isn't genetics based. It's belief based. It's based on his acceptance of a text. And so he countered that by pointing out that, well, I've accepted the word of a scientist, to which I said, well, I've actually done some genetic study. I understand how it works. I've physically tested my own DNA. And so he said that he could not accept what I'm saying or any other geneticist or any other scientist because he personally does not understand it, and he would have to simply place trust in it as he did the text. So for him, having the same type of standard, anecdotal evidence and empirical evidence are on the same level as him. And that's his epistemological framework in a sense. And that's something that I am still trying to come to grips with, because to me it seems like a very flawed way of thinking.
Yeah. And it becomes a matter of choosing whether this is a hill you want to die on. I'm going to make you fucking understand this. Or just put the link to the discussion I had with Kent Hovind in the external chat. Or whether you're going to just accept that that is not a useful time of time. right? And to some extent, I hate to say it, it almost sounds condescending, but to a certain extent, you have to make that second decision. And if you're not interested in taking the time, because it takes way more time to do the non-deficit model than it does the deficit model, because the deficit model gives you this weird opportunity to be like, oh, allow me to educate you on this thing, right? That the non-deficit model doesn't. It doesn't give you the leverage. So the deficit model is super delicious to fucking the kind of atheists that I was bitching to Kent Hovind about. You know, the ones that think that they fucking have their finger on the pulse of being rational and reasonable and scientific and all that happy horse shit. Those are the ones that love the deficit model because they can fucking sit back and point their finger at you.
Right.
Well, I'm here to tell you, fuck
yes,
them.
but Sam Harris knows everything, Maute, so you should shut your face.
Who's this?
Sam Harris.
Sam Harris. I love Sam Harris.
Oh my god, it's actually Maui.
Yes, I pulled a Maute out of the hat.
That's true.
Yay! Hello.
Hello, Jackie. How are you?
I'm doing alright.
Yeah. Did you just wake up? You sick? What's going on?
I had surgery.
Okay, maybe you should stop talking. Princess Bubblegum is telling you to stop talking.
Yes, Jackie knows.
I just wanted to say hi. So, yeah.
I'm super flattered that you came in to say hi to me. Tell Kevin I said hello. To us.
I will.
Very good.
For those of you that did not catch the discussion that Maute and Hovind had just like 30 minutes ago, I am editing the description here, and you can find it. Yeah, it's kind of hard for me to do with Streamlabs. I'm still not as adept with it as I should be, but it is fixated. So there you go, folks. It's in the live chat as well. Please go and watch it because it starts off kind of slow, and I've mentioned to folks before there is a certain technique. There's a Maute technique of interviewing and having discussions that some of you may be familiar with, some of you may have caught on to, but I myself have employed quite a few of his techniques, and they are very effective. Look at the discussion I had with Trey Jadlow. Definitely the buttering up. I definitely took that directly from Maute.
Wait a second. Are you telling me that I have a habit of buttering people up, Drag?
Yes.
That is some insulting bullshit.
It depends. You lay it on thick depending on who you're talking to. If they are incredibly narcissistic and they need it, you'll layer it thick. But if they're
I know the feeling.
A
Rand Campbell. The feeling.
If it's a Campbell or somebody, you don't need to do it as much. Just that rapport is built pretty easily there. But hello dear, how are you doing today? Oh, okay. All right, a little bit of affection from the wife. All right. So, so I noticed in the latter parts of the conversation, because like I said, it did start pretty slow. We did play it here in the Discord and listen to it. One of the nice things about this thing is that he wanted to find something. And you mentioned this before. He wanted to try and combat you somewhere. And then when you brought up the kind of conspiratorial nature of some of his assertions, especially with the acceptance of evolution, I found it hilarious because he had made reference to someone who had got a degree in Harvard and that he was almost forced to accept the evil of evolution, to which I laughed. And because I remember a conversation where an instructor that I had who teaches this stuff for the same course that I was tutoring said to me, they don't have to accept this as fact. They just have to know the material because, we're going to disagree. And I think that's interesting in light of what, Dr. Dino was trying to espouse.
Well, yeah, I thought that was a weird point. He really didn't have a counter argument. He just kept going back to it. Like even when I disentangled atheists from evolutionists, he was just like, "Great. So if they think science is so great," I'm like, "Whoa." I just addressed the they that you're talking about. But yeah, it's the reset button is strong in him.
It is. When he didn't have a direct rebuttal to what you were saying, like it was one of those kind of mutually agreeable points, he would just kind of trot out another one of his lines. It didn't matter if it had anything to do with what you were saying or not, and he'd spend another 5 minutes elaborating on a point that you had never made. I think there was one pivot where he went from abiogenesis to evolution, or to evolution to abiogenesis. I can't remember which, but that it had nothing to do with what you guys were actually discussing, and I thought it was precious of him.
There were a couple points where strategy was, and once again, this wasn't a debate, this wasn't a competition. Nobody won, nobody lost. But just to use a turn of phrase, there was a point where I didn't have to win, I just didn't have to lose, if you know what that means.
Mm-hmm.
I have to put efforts forth to gain points. I just needed to not sound stupid for the rest of the time. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh no, I know.
The more I let him talk about certain things, for me, the more obvious it became that he was dodging genuine conversation to go to his script, and it just changed things, right?
Oh yeah.
Being able to talk to him, being able to ask him pointed questions, and to genuinely, jokingly, hopefully, butter him up enough to be able to critique him and get him to answer the critique in a way that he hasn't already practiced on 17 other people this week. That was the challenge for me, was to keep him like in the moment. So if he needed to go off for a couple of minutes on his, I thought that the more he talked, the more tangents he went on, the more absurd it would sound when I redirected him towards the question I asked. So in that role, I was just like, I don't have to point out that he's going off on tangents. I just have to let him. Direct him. If I redirect him more than a couple times, the people who are watching this are going to understand. They're going to see that.
Yes, and I think people do need to see more of that. I think, of course, his flock are going to, hang at his every word. It doesn't matter if he stayed silent, for an hour and a half. They're going to claim there was some sort of victory in just a conversation. But I think for the folks watching it, it was very clear that he did not want to actually engage in certain conversation. I won't say all of it. I think for a decent portion, maybe 60-70%, he did just kind of want to chat. But when the switch happens, you kind of see it in his face. The lights just kind of turn on a little brighter.
And I got, my smugness kind of came out. Like as soon as he started as soon as I felt my smugness well up, I was like, okay, this isn't good. Let me redirect in a way that diffuses, that lets some of this steam off, right?
Yeah.
Points like I used my line. I used my line like, I accept that you think that.
Yes.
Anytime you hear me say that, know that you can tell what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Right?
Your face said it, because you had made your mic had keyed. You really weren't saying anything, but your mic had keyed, and you just kind of had that look. The look that the Citan atheist, like the eyebrow raising, the Rock's eyebrow thing. Yeah. We caught a bit of that, and it was funny because I think it was Renee was saying, "Oh shit, no, now he's getting Maute pissed." I was like, "No, I don't think Maute's getting pissed. He's just getting irritated at all the passive aggressiveness." And so it was a battle of the passive aggressive between you two. And
I can take passive aggression. I can take hits. Right, being insulted by Kent Hovind is a badge of honor. Right, so like that's and he didn't really insult me, by the way.
Oh no, I don't think you're legitimately offended by any, because and I don't know if maybe it's just me, but the second that you mention my lab, what we do in our lab with this science, when you added legitimacy to yourself, to him, he almost took that as an affront and a challenge, because then he started to almost deride people who think this about this, obviously referencing your work, and that's something that I don't know, a lot of people would have taken that personally, because if you spent X amount of hours, X amount of days working on this project, knowing the science, and trying to do your best job, I think most folks would find that very insulting from somebody who couldn't even comprehend it.
And even in talking about that and talking about my lab, that as a way to like critique science. Fortunately, I was able to kind of agree with him. Like he was just like, "Oh, well, could that have been done by a creator?" I was like, "Yes, been done by a creator." But then I had to that's not the end of the conversation, though. Like that was not a defeating argument, right? And here's why. And he was gracious enough to like let me get my point out. But in response to the point that I brought up, which was, you know, like, sure, it's possible, but the question is, all possibilities are tethered to probabilities. Is it probable? Well, the field of science, the way that it is, and the field of biology and science shows that the probable theory underpinning these things is evolution, right? And he was just like, oh, I just don't accept that. It's like, okay, well, I knew that you weren't going to accept it, but it needs to be said. It needs to be heard that in the face of, oh, could it possibly have been God? The answer is always yes, but it's a sophisticated, nuanced yes. And since it was my show, I got to unpack the sophistication.
All right. So we got comments from the live chat. Sorry, folks, I am playing this game and ignoring you. So let's see, Mr. Lowe.
I have a feeling that you're going to specifically call on me like every other week, just so that you could play a game. Just ask me one question and know that I'm going to talk for 10 minutes while you can play a goddamn game.
Oh, yeah.
I need to hang out where somebody talks a real fucking lot. Let me call Maute.
Well, yeah. Well, people wanted to hang out to happen, so I said fine. I was just going to sit and just invite you in, but I figure other people might want to catch this too. So Mr. Logo says, and Maute, you shouldn't call this fraud a doctor.
Tough shit.
Yeah.
Tough shit.
And it's from Bobby. Hey, Maute may find this to be an oversimplification, but for those who don't understand evolution, Hovind is a gifted debater. For those who do, he's a carnival barker. That's an interesting depiction.
That was a great simplification. But that also that speaks to the point that you made, Drag. Like the person that you were talking to that thought that this guy is educated and awesome is because he's fantastic at plain speak.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
Fantastic at it. He's fantastic at setting things up to be obvious. I mean, the fact that he kept asking me, isn't that obviously true? I was like, well, no. I'm not compelled by how obviously true the thing you just said was. Like, we disagree.
But I think
that like blew his mind. It seemed like he was like, that is not obviously true to you?
And that's a part of his strength, and I have to explain about that because I really did not understand the appeal to Hovind. Like it just, you know, of course, as an atheist, yeah, sure, you don't understand, you hate God, you know, that's kind of the narrative that's out there. But I genuinely, just as if we were just two guys in a bar, I don't see the appeal, and I can attribute that to me pretending that I'm some sophisticated, snobbish twat, but I'm from Louisiana, and that no such thing exists when you're from Louisiana. So I think that Hovind's greatest strength is people's misunderstanding of science, and specifically, it is that if it's scientific, then ergo it must be intuitive. It has to be intuitive to human thought and to human understanding.
Well, I'm glad that I was able to get that point in too, because when he was talking about, well, if it's created, it must have a creator. I was like, that's wonderfully reflexive and intuitive. But science keeps showing us how counterintuitive the universe is. Like he just didn't I just accept that tacitly. Mm-hmm. Like I don't know how to make that more compelling than saying those words out loud.
But what does that mean? Like, what is if you're saying that to somebody? Like, I know what you mean. Scientist Sam knows what you mean. If you and any soft or hard scientist, and we're don't worry, we're not going to get into that, Maute. We're not going to hurt your feelings. But
hey, you tell your wife that I'm only a soft scientist when it's not time.
Hey, your science is soft most of the day. So I mean, come on.
So, oh god. So when we talk about this sort of thing, right?
This is where the deficit model fails, because I literally wasn't on that point. I wasn't debating him. I was informing him, but he wasn't persuaded by it. I didn't try to persuade him any further, recognizing that it wasn't going to go any. Like he doesn't accept the things that tacitly true for me because I'm in this bubble of science. It is tacitly true that there is a high level of uncertainty going on in the world, and having certainty is just a weird sense of psychological confidence, right? I believe in numeracy. I believe that people have biases. I believe that people have blind spots. All of these things, and I also believe a whole host of things about science, about what a null hypothesis is and how you support, like all of the counterintuitive things that are involved in the structure and fundamental basis of science, people who don't study it. And that's why, because Ken Hovind doesn't understand it and because he doesn't utilize those kinds of terms and sophistication, he's able to communicate with people, lay people. So when I say that science is, the universe is queerer than we can imagine, that is just a bumper sticker way of saying science continues to show how counterintuitive the things in our universe that we live in are. So if you think that an intuitive, reflexive explanation for things is the best one, you've been shown wrong over and over and over again, and you're having less and less and less ground to stand on to use that as a tool for figuring shit out.
I said something on the Magic Sandwich show a few years back, and I said that certainty is the purest form of ignorance. If you're absolutely certain of something and you can't be swayed from it, then you are ignorant because you don't care what's true. You only care what you prefer to be true. And of course, Kent Hovind does exactly that. He doesn't care what's true. He doesn't care about evolution. He only wants to perpetuate what he wants to be true. And everything else, he'll just dismiss out of hand. And one of his primary goals of doing it is to make it look completely ridiculous. Well, you think that pine trees evolved into humans.
Yeah, I accepted that whole cloth. I just didn't bother trying to hedge that. It's like, yep. And you think it's crazy? Cool. I'm cool that you think it's crazy. Or, again, as I would phrase it, I'm cool with you thinking that it's crazy.
But he does that deliberately to try and make you look like you're an idiot, and you believe that? That's that, because it sounds stupid. It sounds crazy.
He's trying to hit someone's pride, right?
Yeah.
It's not so much his pride, their pride. It's his pride, because his pride is, I want to make this person look stupid so that my audience gets a laugh out of this idiot guy on the internet who thinks that pine trees turn to humans.
But by mocking and ridiculing like that, isn't it meant to get under the person's skin and their pride, right?
Yeah, I would say that it is a way to rile somebody up. And there was a point where he was so obviously trying to rile me up that when I didn't try to answer his question, he turned the question. He kept saying it. He's like, "Can you answer that?" And I'm like, "I haven't been offended in such a way that I need to defend myself." Like, what this tactic that you're doing? I'm calling you out on it. Like, I'm not offended.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I spoke to King Crocoduck about before their debate, and I said, man, it's you're gonna have to approach this from a different standpoint than I would, because I'm only gonna take bullshit from someone like him for so long until I try to push your shit in, and so that's why when I had the opportunity to debate Kent Hovind, because one of his little followers on G Plus was going around, and that's actually when Fiona did her debate with Hovind. It was around that time because he was looking for more people. I declined. I understand my proclivities, we'll call them that, and I understand that I may not have the necessary patience not to fall into that, and for me just to outright insult him and point out that I am actually doing real science. You are pretending on the internet with a conviction behind your belt and a brand of followers who probably have, more teeth than they do brain cells. I don't give a shit what you think. And it really wouldn't help anything. It'd make me feel better. I'd get a good laugh, but that really wouldn't help. So I think it is necessary for folks who have the correct demeanor to engage him in a way that's, I guess, more efficacious than someone like me could engage.
But his debate tactic is not to debate the person who's actually having an interlocutory with.
Pete, real quick, man, you are coming in way loud, my man. Is he loud for y'all?
Yeah, he's a little bit.
Okay. I have to turn you down.
But I'm sorry. I need to get going, gang. The wife and kids just came home. I have some fresh haircuts to judge and observe, and the rest of my day to take care of.
All right. Well, thank you.
So thanks for letting me in the hang.
Thank you. Please come back around. Ozzy's in here, usually talking. We got some philosophical stuff that happens at least twice a week. So just pop in and just shoot the shit with folks, man.
All right, man. Everyone has my handle or some way of contacting me, so keep me in the loop.
Yes.
Nice to see you. Nice to see you again, Maute.
All right, Happy New Year. I haven't seen you this year yet, Laura.
No. Well, I've been having some changes, shall we say?
Awesome. All right, guys. I'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Mic check. Is this better?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, one of the debate tactics that Hovind likes to use is he doesn't debate the person in the debate. He's actually just performing for the audience, and those like little terms like, "Oh, you believe pine trees can be people," and that's for the audience, and that's for the ignorance of the audience too. Because if he can play to that, then he can be more successful in his debate tactic.
Yeah, and I agree, because it's like because it's such a nuanced statement that needs to be made, but to explain that, you're going to get bogged down into this quagmire that he's hoping that you go into, because all he's going to do, as you explained it, is ridicule you. He's not actually listening to what you're saying. The audience is more than likely not going to be able to, fully appreciate the nuances there, and so all you can do is just sidestep it, honestly. And it seems almost a bit like, okay, well, if you criticize him for sidestepping questions, and then you're sidestepping stuff, well, if you're sidestepping something that isn't pertinent to the conversation, and it's an obvious tactic to try and just add nonsense and insults to the discourse, then why even entertain it? That's the way that I view it. And I think most people do.
No, I think you're 100% right. It makes sense, because when you don't have any substance, you have to you have to do something to at least be part of the conversation, and that's just his thing. Like even with his legal thing, there's no way that you can tell me that he wasn't convicted. It's everywhere, but he's going to tell you that he did nothing wrong, and he was actually the victim of a crime. So it's just that type of victimhood. He's always the victim. I think it's like is it narcissistic? What's it called? Is it narcissism? Is that?
That's actually what Maute said earlier, that he is a narcissist, and so that, like, this sort of thing kind of feeds that narcissistic personality that he has. And I would agree. That's for my armchair psychology. I would definitely agree that he is incredibly narcissistic.
Like think about this. In his case, his peers, that means the other preachers in the neighborhood, they testified against him. His employees testified against him. All these people testified that, yes, this guy, this is what he said, this is what he thought, and then he's saying that they're all liars, or he did nothing wrong. Even to the fact where eventually admitted that they did everything wrong, and he's still just saying that he was wrongfully convicted. And I think it's just that type of, but he needs to do that to continue to have the money flowing, because people thought that he was a convicted fraudster, then he wouldn't be getting that money. So he has to, his livelihood depends on his reputation.
I said this several years ago about Eric, his son. That if he decided that he'd heard so many arguments for atheism and that he didn't stop believing anymore, and he was an atheist or even an agnostic, then he would be cutting his throat financially. He'd have to get a real job. And the same applies to Matt Slick and, all these other people, these professional apologists.
It applies to Matt Slick? I don't think it does, actually, because unlike these folks, Matt Slick actually went to a seminary and actually does answer to an actual church. These folks don't. They don't answer to any other authority in a theological way. So actually, I would argue that it actually doesn't apply to Matt Slick, because Matt Slick actually is more of a mainstream Christian that actually has checks and balances. These guys are from wackadoo land, and they run their business like a cult.
You don't think?
I don't know. Matt Slick says that he holds this guy into high esteem, so I don't know how you would separate them, because Matt Slick says himself that he is like this giant in them when it comes to evolutionary science.
The fact he's gone to seminary means nothing really compared to his attitude. His whole
does
life
mean a lot. So I'm just arguing from a religious standpoint that if you go to a seminary, you are that is a legit seminary and not some diploma mill. He actually has done some rigorous study. He actually does answer to other authority. Kent Hovind does not. That's what I'm trying to say.
I was talking about Eric Hovind before, but I think
either way, that's a family business. It's a family racket, right? They're part of it.
But the problem, I think you're misunderstanding what I'm trying to say, is that if Matt Slick stopped believing because he'd heard so many atheist arguments, and that he finally had to take a step back and say, you know what, I don't think I can support this belief anymore. Because there are plenty, I mean, the Clergy Project is a perfect example of loads of people that have gone to seminaries and so on who have decided they don't believe in God anymore, but they can't, they have to continue in churches and things like that because
they're cowardly and they can't pick up a real job and maybe lower themselves to work in customer service or something like that while they tread water and figure out what to do with themselves. So they're going to lie and say that they're a preacher, but they're really an atheist. I'm not sympathetic to the Clergy Project at all, like zero sympathy, because then like you are treading on something that I think is really despicable, and I'd throw you in the same camp as Eric Hovind.
Well, how let's create a hypothesis where Matt Slick is the equivalent of someone who doesn't believe anymore, but he's putting on a pretense, exactly like the Clergy Project people, like you say. How would he be any different that he went to seminary like they went to seminary, and that his whole system of income.
All I ask for
hang on, give me a sec,
preachers
please.
is to
Give me a
reroute
sec,
their
please.
talents.
I haven't finished quite yet. His whole income is purely based upon him going to do a radio show thing and his calm ministry and stuff like that, getting income from that.
Right. He's going to have a life crisis, figure out what he's going to do next. Again, I wouldn't be very sympathetic if Matt Slick had to reroute his whole life if he decided he wasn't a believer, because I'd have more respect for these people that actually say, hey, I can't do this anymore and walk away from church. I worked in church for 15 years, and when I disagreed with how churches ran, I walked away. I wasn't a big pussy and pretended like I was something I'm not. I have no respect for that. And I do think that there are other talents. If you have the talent to speak in front of people, and if you have the talent, Matt Slick has some talent. Those talents could be placed in management or somewhere else. He'd be a dick manager, but he could probably do it. So he could lower himself to that. And this is like such a hypothesis. It's like if Matt Slick was an atheist, what would he do? If Eric Hovind was an atheist, what would he do? Well, he's less talented. I don't know what he'd do.
But I think the point would be is that, look, I would grant you everything that you just said to be correct. I think if you did have this change of heart, it would be best if you just came out. But I think the reality of it may be a little different, where if you spent 30 years of your life devoted to something, this is, your resume has one thing on it. It has, I was a clergy in a church, or, I've done this one thing. And then up overnight, you've decided that, hey, this, I don't believe in this thing anymore. You're talking about your only stream of income. You're talking about all your all this stuff that's now built upon this body of work. You can't just walk away from it one day. And so I do understand that, hey, the courageous thing to do is say, hey, I don't believe in this anymore, and just walk away. But that person still has to eat. Person still's got to pay the mortgage. That person still has to have some source of income. And if this is their main source of income, then it's going to be harder. It's going to be harder to walk away, and it's going to be harder not to believe it's true, because you have so much riding on it being true.
That person that's in clergy that's walking away is in the same position as the person that went to nuke school, or the same position that somebody has a niche job in a weird, bizarre computer science field and they can't find that job. Suck it up, buttercup. Take a job that you think is beneath you. I don't care.
Wow, you're hard.
Well, I think that, other than sort of the harshness of tone, I think that we're talking about different things, right? Like, so in the case of a hypothetical person who obsesses over the definition of atheism and went to nuke school, let's be real. There's not a defined skill set there in terms of that person that does something, right? Where they have something clearly of worth and they just Are
you arguing that Matt Slick has some more worth in the nuke school?
But there's more worth in, like, he has a, and so it's like, I think that, like, it should be praiseworthy if someone is to step away, because I don't think it's really that. Like, I can't imagine it's that. Like, I find this is weird because I find it odd to be sympathizing with Matt Slick, but I will. You know, I think that it's an incredibly hard thing to do, to just sort of abandon the only way that you know how to make a living.
Right, but
You know,
you're
I think
pretending like there's the skill sets for a preacher do not stretch out to other things, but they do. A preacher doesn't just sit there and do a sermon and do theology. A preacher does other life skills involved in church and finances and other things. Preachers can definitely stretch out and do other skill sets. I think it's silly to say that they can't.
Well, nobody's saying that. I just want to make sure nobody's saying that.
Yeah, it would be silly if I was saying, but you're project, like I'm just saying what you're doing right now, and you're projecting a lot of personal animus. So it's not, you know, not really responding to what I'm saying, because like it's hard. We, as you know, as armchair quarterbacks and not the potential employer of someone like Matt Slick, we don't really know what his options would be, right? And it's not one of, you know, the people that I know, they one of the people that I know in my life, they have formal training as a lawyer, but they don't use any of that formally. They don't use any of that training because they just hated being a lawyer when they started. And like that, you know, that takes a lot of balls to abandon, a field of training to pursue something else. And so, like,
I work with tons of people that do that, though. There's tons of people that don't use their degrees.
But that's not everyone, right? Like,
no, I'm just saying, like, it happens a lot.
No, I know it happens a lot, but it, you know, in terms of something where there's a solid path where you've created a life in that lane for 20, 30 years, I mean, I don't think it would be the easiest thing for it.
I know someone that worked in law enforcement, and now she does taxes. Like, this happens.
And just saying it happens a lot is just like saying, you know, people win the lottery a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of people who win the lottery, but that doesn't mean it's something that you can plan on doing. And I would also say that if I do understand, I am sympathetic to your argument, Holy Spackle, the fact that people do change careers. But if you've built up a body of work over 20 or 30 years, and now you're trying to change to another, you know, you're not going to get as much pay. And you're right, they could get like a shit job, but that their rent is still going to be due. Their mortgage, you know, their lifestyle has been dependent on the amount of money they make and, you know, what they've been doing. And now you're talking about switching all of that, you know, kind of overnight. I think it's extremely hard to do. For those who've done it,
it's hard.
More power to them. But they've hit the lottery, you know, or well, not as extreme, but they've accomplished something, and we all can accept that they've accomplished this goal of actually changing their career. But we can't just sit here and say like it's something easy to do, because it's not.
Well,
I think the key is the amount of money, right? So you can stop what you're doing and pick up most any job. It's the amount of money. So my question is, how much money is Eric Hovind actually making? That's curious.
Yeah, well, I want to chime in a bit on the idea of the transferability of skills. I mean, yeah, some people can make these career changes, and you know, look at Bobby Allison, for example. He was a pastor for a long time, and then he quit doing it. He's he's an atheist, so he's now the preaching atheist, and he had some skills. So I agree with your point, Spackle, that there is a skill set that pastors have. It's not just writing a sermon and going up and preaching. So some people do make the transition, you know, do make career changes. But I think the issue here is the specific people, because when you look at an actual pastor in an actual church, they have to have a diverse skill set. But when you look at these little ministry things, like, you know, Kent Hovind, Ken Ham at least has some business experience, but Kent Hovind, the wealth of his business experience is in fraud. And then you look at like Matt Slick, he's a one-man ministry, and he does do nothing more than write sermons, research things on the internet, make web pages, and argue with people on the internet. He does not got a transferable skill set.
But he's also
I disagree. Yeah, I disagree. He's smart enough to transfer to something else.
So I gotta correct that. He has other skills from other jobs. I'm saying he has no skills that he's developed as the president and emperor of Karm that's going to transfer into other jobs. He may have other skills from before that, but there's nothing that he's developed while at Karm that makes him an appealing manager, for example, for an actual company.
Yeah, his only other job is doing a radio show, isn't it? He does network radio or something. Some Christian.
I think to Speckle's point, I think that those people would need to do, for lack of a better word, a lot of soul searching about what the best move forward is. I'm saying I understand it. Whether or not it's an ethical decision to continue as a preacher when you've, had a crisis of faith that leads you to become an atheist. I mean, I just really can't speak to it because I can't put myself there, and it just seems like Hogtie said, there's a lot of external factors there, and I don't, I think that unfortunately, there's the old saying is in the book Anna Karenina, which is that every happy family is happy for the same reasons, but every miserable family is miserable for their own unique reason. And it's sort of like, every successful preacher is probably successful for the same reasons, but once they have to move on, I mean, I think that's their own shit show to go off of. And I think I would be very impressed by Matt Slick if he had a crisis of faith and then he stopped doing what he was doing. But I bet he would be the type of person to just continue in his current path, just because, like, how else is he going to make a living?
I don't think it's like him. I think you guys actually, and again, this is just observation of his personality. I think he's so obsessed with what he thinks is true that it would just end in an internal. I don't think he would be able to be a fraudster in that way. As much as I don't like him, I think he's a dick. I don't see him as a fraudster like I do the Hovinds. He just doesn't.
Same here.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's yeah.
I think that's my problem with Eric and Ken is I see them as hucksters, just completely. Like, well, they don't care what's true.
Well, what about Eric? I think a little less too. I think Ken Hovind is strictly about the cash. He's strictly about getting that money in and making. That's his thing is a little different. I think Eric Hovind, he may believe this. Like every time I watch him, and I think it's like a nice little plus the fact that he gets millions of dollars from this too. It's like, okay, I believe this and I get millions of dollars. Where I think his father's kind of like, yo, this is how we going. This is how we're going to eat tonight.
The problem is Kent has no new material at all.
It's so bad. Didn't the Answers in Genesis say he should stop using some of the arguments that he uses because they've been disproven?
Well,
yeah.
I think that the fact that it's consistent is what he relies on, because if you think about the whole shtick, the Bible's reliable, I'm reliable. I am preaching the Bible, therefore I need to be as stagnant and stale, as the very thing that I derive.
Is it just me or is Drag breaking up?
Drag is breaking up. Matter of fact, I can see how much I can see how much his company makes. It's a not-for-profit. What's Ken Hovind's church? Because I could actually look it up to see how much money they're making. The new thing, it's Dr. Dino, right? Or something like that.
I think it is drdino.com.
Let me look it up, because if it's a not-for-profit, you can get that money.
He doesn't, for a philosophical reason, he doesn't register under any portion of 501c.
So none of his, if he has the Dino Land Adventure Park, he probably has it as a not-for-profit. It might not be a 501c3, but it could just be a not-for-profit.
It doesn't exist anymore. He's he's just got a little office where he does his stuff now. There's no actual Dino Land.
So where's all those donations just going to him? Like people are just, because if that's happening, that's just income. So he's got to have some structure in which, like, so let's say if I just gave Kent Hovind $1 million because I like him, he would still have that's income tax. He would have to pay income taxes a high level. But if I give it to the corporation, then it's tax free, and then they can pay him. So it's a different kind of structure.
Yeah.
So I think he has to have something in place.
Can I be heard? Real quick.
Yeah, you're back. You're good.
It's better. Okay, go ahead.
5x4. I think he did create a corporation. Remember, somebody donated a fairly significant piece of land to his efforts, and he would have been crazy to have put that in his own name. I mean, he is crazy, but he generally knows how to get out of tax liability.
That's why he spent 10 years in prison, right?
I didn't say he knows how to do it properly. Just said he knows how to do it.
It's funny. Some of his fans were messaging me about, "Oh, he's innocent. Blah blah blah. Blah. It's just structuring." I'm like, "You do it and see what happens to you."
It's just arson. Look, a few cinders here, a little fire there. It's just arson. No big deal. Oh, speaking of
Yeah,
which,
he didn't.
Real quick, can we, MP, can we give an overview of why you've drawn Kent Hovind's ire and some of the ire of his followers?
Okay, but before he does that, speaking of arson, so let's get. I want to bookmark that. I want to get back to the arson topic. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, because Aaron asked me to do a piece just outlining what happened in his case, because he was going around saying that even though he was convicted, it was all fraudulent, and he said he wasn't really actually convicted at all, and all this other stuff. So I went and pulled up the court documents, and just kind of read through everything to let everybody know exactly what happened. He got a paralegal to go on and more or less say that he was innocent. But in the video that he responded to my piece that I did for Aaron, they really didn't challenge anything. They were kind of like, yeah, I was convicted, but I'm innocent. And he put the video up as refuting Nate or refuting me, but he, at not one point did he even play any piece of the video, nor did he even refute any of the points, because I just literally read from the opinion. So, right now his whole argument is that even though he was convicted, he was, number one, wrongfully convicted. The government actually committed crimes against him, and people should just believe him and not believe any of the documents. So my response video that I'm actually doing, I actually have the jury forms, like where the jury checks, like guilty, guilty, guilty. I had to go back in and get all those forms. So I'm going to show, like, no, here's the 12 members of the jury, and they found you guilty, and here's their signature, and here's the forms they filled out, and here's what the court said. Because they made it so simple to show that this guy, not only did he know what he was doing was wrong, but he tried to avoid it, and he's so stupid, they have him on video admitting to all his crimes, and all of his friends and family testified that he admitted to all these crimes. So, for him to say he's some innocent fawn is just almost laughable.
Well, it's part of his delusion, right? I think he honestly believes it when he says that the conviction was entirely the fruits of a corrupt conspiracy amongst government officials.
Listen, when you have the people, the list, the witnesses, they had his own employees, the people who he wasn't paying the taxes for, they testified. The other preachers, they testified. People at the bank, I'm talking about, and then he actually went on video and said, yes, I knew that these forms for taxes, but I didn't fill them out, because I wanted to avoid filling them out. And it's like, if you're admitting to all this, then how can you now say that you didn't commit these crimes? You literally on video are saying you committed these crimes and commit the crime. So, when you got somebody who has, like, say 100,000 subscribers like Ken Hovind, and all those people seem to just be 100% bought into whatever he's going to say, then you're not convincing them. You're not convincing him, nor are you convincing those fans, because they want it to be true.
Yeah, this is almost exactly the same thing as Trump's got now, where he's gone and basically said, I didn't have to do this, but I'm declaring an emergency. And as soon as he says, I didn't have to do this, then it's clear that it's not an emergency.
Hey, MP, you and I have been wondering, and I don't know if now's the right time, but I guess let me say it this way as a food for thought exercise. If you've been through the court record, all the pretrial stuff, and the actually what happened at trial, one of the things you'll know about the actual trial was that the defense didn't, like Hovind didn't put on a defense.
Really?
Right? He rested without putting on a defense, presenting that the Crown, I'm sorry, the prosecutors, federal prosecutors, did not rise to meet their burden of proof, that they simply hadn't demonstrated that there was a crime, and therefore there wasn't a need for him to put on a defense. And I think a lot of, I'm pretty confident most people who've looked at the case actually know something about running a trial. I think that was a huge mistake on his part. There's some circumstances where that works, but he's nuts. He shouldn't have done it that way.
I need to know something.
Because at the go ahead. I was wondering just one quick point about Talktai's point. After after the prosecution rests. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh well, if you want to clarify something, but
I just want to clarify. I just want to clarify just one point. After the prosecution rests their case, when I was a prosecutor, after I rested my case, every defendant and every defense attorney will always make a motion that I didn't fulfill my burden of proof. And when you do that, then the judge can say, then it's more or less their ruling right there. Okay, they have, either they have or they haven't, or whether it's a question for the jury. So the fact that he did that is just as common, that the fact that, yes, they didn't fulfill their burden, but the fact that he didn't put on the defense after that was denied, that I think is the problem.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I get that part of it's standard, and then that's not the part I'm pointing to. It's the absence of putting on a defense. So with the exception of like a one-day trial, if you've got a multi-day trial, you do even before they set the trial date, but certainly before the prosecution opens, you'll do an application for a dismissal sua sponte, simply saying that the filing itself doesn't rise to there being any hope of there being a demonstration that a crime was committed, that the allegation isn't structured to demonstrate that there's a crime. So you file, I think it's dismissal sua sponte, and then the judge usually says, no, we're going to hear from the prosecutors. We're going to actually see their full case, because accepting the filing on the face, that would demonstrate that there was a crime. So we're going to go to trial to put the prosecution to the proof of the allegation, because the allegation itself does lay out a crime. So we're going to see the proof of it. And then after they lay out their evidence, then you do another motion to dismiss on that the prosecutors didn't put enough evidence forward, that they simply didn't package up enough of a case to meet their burden. And then that gets turned down, but it's worth a shot. But then you're at the point where they say you have the option now to put on a defense. So I'm not objecting to the idea of the dismissal application for sua sponte, or the what was the second one you said, the a motion to dismiss after the prosecution's case. But then given the opportunity to put on a case, he says, I'm not going to do that, which happens very rarely, especially if the judge has already ruled that there isn't grounds for motion to dismiss for the inadequacy of the prosecutor's case. That's a pretty big clue that the judge is going to want to hear some explanation from the defense. And if the defense waives the right to put on a defense, that to me was the bad choice. And I guess what my question was going to be is, given what you've seen of the thing, like yes or no, and then you can sort of flesh it out later if you want, but would you have been able to mount a defense? Is there something that you've seen in the record that makes you think, here's what he should have said in his own defense?
I got a question that goes on with that, though. Did he actually have a lawyer? I mean, did he actually hire a lawyer? And
he had lawyers.
Yes, but go ahead, MP, you know the record.
He had lawyers. Yes, I think he had a. The problem is that sometimes you have difficult clients, and I've had this with some of my defense. Is that the client doesn't understand what you can argue for a defense, because you can't just get up there as a defendant and just start arguing nonsense. It has to be legally relevant arguments that are going to help your case. So Ken Hovind's arguments that he was trying that if you read through the trial transcript, you'll see that he was trying that there were a couple of arguments that he was trying to make that he wanted his lawyers to make. One of them was that he wasn't a citizen, like it was like a sovereign citizen argument, that the government didn't have any jurisdiction over him.
Jurisdiction, yeah.
The second argument was that I'm blanking on it, but he made some vacuous argument that that because he he was making an argument about structuring, that he had to, that since it wasn't over 10,000 that they couldn't prosecute him. And his last argument was something real silly about him being, because he considered his employees ministers or ministries or whatever, that it didn't fit the statute's requirement, and he had some type of exemption. So it may sound good to him, but legally, the judge, there'll be a conference, and they'll say, well, this is the defense I want to put on, and the judge will say, well, none of these arguments are legally sufficient to make a defense. You can't argue that these are nonsense. It's only going to lead to what they call jury confusion. If the judge concludes that, then you have to make relevant arguments that's going to combat your case. And if you don't have any, then all that you can do is sit up there and say, well, I don't have, I'm not, there's no defense I can put on. And what happens is with what his lawyers did, which I think was astute, was then place the blame totally on the prosecutor. Say, okay, well, even though we don't have a defense, we're going to hold the prosecutor to say, you guys didn't put a compelling argument on for structuring. And then they even argued against structuring itself, how structuring has been used by the government, and which is true, in some very evil ways to hurt people. And those arguments were good, but in these type of process crimes where you're just where somebody says, you didn't file your tax report or you didn't do this, it's all on the papers and the bank records. So, that's what happened with Paul Manafort recently in the news. He got convicted because it wasn't because you were making an argument that he did something or he had the intent. It was all based on the bank records. These are the records. This is what the bank says. If you can't combat that, then that's it, and you got 12 jurors who are just looking at bank records in the back and saying, well, why are we really even back here? It seems to be the guy is guilty. But I think his lawyers did what they could especially with the type of client they had.
Well, hold on. Let's just correct the record here for what his representation was. So, I mean, when Laura asked that question, you said yes, I said yes, but, and then I thought what you were going to explain. So maybe I'm misunderstanding the detail here, but I don't think I am. So he did have lawyers during the pretrial phase, but he didn't have representation at the conclusion of the prosecution's case. He didn't have lawyers. My understanding is that he made an application, a motion for dismissal pro se, and then when given the option to put on a defense, no, maybe he did have a lawyer then. Okay, let me ask you this: who waived the defendant's right to put on a defense? Was that done by Hovind pro se?
I can look. Let me look it up. Let me look it up now, so I can speak intelligently about it. Hold on, pull it up.
Because and that's kind of an important point, because that waiver, it has to be the court. The court can't accept somebody waiving a right. It's a very, very difficult thing. It opens up all sorts of avenues for appeal. If you get somebody, like for example, if G-Man ever represented himself in a criminal case, and then no, it's a solid example. But and then he just went. You know how G-Man always says, "Well, if it went to court, it'd be over in 5 minutes." I love how G-Man thinks that there's such a thing as a 5-minute trial. Mm-hmm. But that would be a good example, is if he were ever a criminal defendant and he represented himself, when there became a point where he was going to waive a right, either a right to be represented by qualified counsel, or the right to put on a defense, or the right to remain silent and actually put on a defense by appearing as his own witness. Right, that requires an important waiver. The court would have to take a moment to pause and ponder the competence question. Is that individual understanding of the facts and the consequences of waiving that right, and are they competent to make the decision?
Well. Usually, there's 2 points for the competency. First, like before trial, if you believe the person's not competent to understand what's going on, then you have that kind of before trial. But then when you get to the point like you're talking about, what they do is they'll have the defendant stand right there, and the judge will say, "You're waiving this right, and these are the implications to it. Mm-hmm. Do you agree?" And they'll say yes, and they got to say yes on the record. Which you'll see, defendants will like shake their head yes, and the court reporter can't put shake head yes. Mm-hmm. It'd have to be audible, so they'd appeal and be like, "Well, I didn't say anything," and then you'd have to have the whole shit over again. So they literally go down the list. So if that was to happen in this situation, if the judge was to say, "Do you give up this right, and you understand these are the consequences?" and he said yes, then there's nothing you can do, because you can waive that right, but you have to be fully informed. The new thing here in New York for the past couple of years is that for immigrants, like right now, if you're prosecuting, I should say undocumented immigrants, if you're prosecuting someone who's here illegally, and you have to, in New York State courts, you have to let them know that by taking a plea, by pleading guilty, they could be deported back to their home country if they take the plea. So is that when we were having people plead guilty who happen to be undocumented, ICE would come and then deport them back to their country. So people were saying, well, you guys didn't tell me that this was a consequence that could happen. So now in every court, when somebody, no matter who they are, if they're a U.S. citizen or not, the court always tells them by pleading guilty, if you have any immigration issues, you could be deported back to your country. So it's I think it's called knowing, intelligently, and voluntarily. You have to be able to, the court has to be able to prove that you knowingly, intelligently, and voluntarily made this decision to waive this particular right. If they do, then you're on your own.
Yeah, actually, while you're looking that up, let me explain a little bit, because part of where I know about this, like I know how it plays out in the Canadian context, but if other people want to look into it, how it plays out in the American criminal cases, just start watching a lot of sovereign citizen videos, especially sovereign citizen tries jurisdiction argument on judge gone wrong, something like that. Those sorts of videos, because you'll often see a lot of the sovereign citizens, or especially the Moorish American national, they don't want lawyers. They actually assert that there's something wrong with having a member of whatever bar association, somebody called to bar, represent them, especially the Moors, because they say that it's actually against their faith or against their constitution for a black man to be represented by a white man or by a slave or any of the slaves of the white man. So they consistently turn down lawyers. Now you might think from watching TV or whatever that all they have to do is say, no, I waive my right to counsel. And the judge goes, okie dokie. And it doesn't work that way, because it all of a sudden opens a hearing on a motion into a bunch of different issues. And there's a weird thing that happens. So these guys don't want a lawyer. Their lawyer is there because they've had one appointed to them. And then when the judge says, okay, well, you've asked to withdraw from the case, let me ask a few questions. And the guy will always stand up and be like, no, he's not my lawyer. He can't answer questions. But the judge will still poll that lawyer about his understanding of, do you have good communication with your client in your professional judgment? Are you able to represent his interests, or is there a significant departure from your goals? Does it interfere with your ethical obligations? And always above the objections of that sovereign or Moorish citizen. Then one of the weird things that will happen is they'll then turn to that defendant, and the judge will ask questions. What is your level of education? What type of employment have you had? These are things that are not relevant. It would normally be prohibited from any discussion about the innocence or guilt. Right? If you imagine if you're on trial for robbing a gas station, and the questions start coming up about whether or not you graduated high school, it's completely not relevant to the determination of innocence or guilt. Yet when you try to waive your lawyer, they ask you questions about, that would be helpful to the court in determining your fitness to understand the consequences of waiving any right you have, including waiving the right to representation by counsel. So these guys always get upset about it. They go, well, I'm not answering questions about whether I went to high school. I want you to prove to me that you have jurisdiction. Because again, these guys all think that in terms for the court to proceed in a case against you, they have to prove jurisdiction. But that doesn't mean they have to have jurisdiction or rule on the jurisdiction issue. That means you have to prove to me. I'm the judge now. You have to prove to my satisfaction you have jurisdiction. And if you can't prove it to me, then we simply can't proceed. And it's arguments like that that actually make judges very hesitant to allow those defendants to waive their right to counsel, because they come in with these goofball arguments. Once the jurisdiction issue has been ruled on, they'll continue to argue and bicker about it and read off nonsense they downloaded from sovereign citizen websites, saying that, well, you still haven't proven jurisdiction. And that makes the judge wonder, well, when you waive your right to counsel, like, are you really competent and knowing of the facts and the consequences? Did I stall long enough for you there, MP?
In Canada, they are really, really friendly, because here, if you waive with like, you can waive your right. If you say I don't want a lawyer, they'll, all right, you don't have a lawyer. But what they'll do is sometimes they'll have a lawyer assist you. They'll be like, even now this guy's not your counsel, but he'll assist you for the process, especially for things that are real serious. It happened up here. We had an active shooter, and the guy happened to be a little nuts, and he said that he didn't want an attorney. So what the judge did was say, okay, well, you have your court-appointed attorney is just going to be like your assistant. He's going to help you through all the legal hurdles because this is very serious. You're going to go to jail for life. So that type of thing. So, but one thing about for Kent Hovind, though, I'm looking at his perfected jury instructions, and his lawyer is here. His name is Alan S. Ritchie, counsel for Kent Hovind. And they wrote his jury instructions. They wrote his response to the jury instructions of what they were going to tell the jury. His perfected jury instructions. He also had So I don't see here where he didn't have an attorney through this process. It seemed like he did.
Okay. Well, Ritchie was definitely his counsel of record for that. Like he's the one who would sign the documents for submission. My recollection is that Ritchie was fired either right before or right after the prosecution opened their case. And that he wasn't present at the time that the prosecution rested. And you're saying that he was actually there to discuss matters of jury instruction. Well, that means he was there for the whole trial. Okay, well, I was wrong then. Okay,
no, you may be right. I don't know. Maybe he just. I literally have this dated the 2nd of October, 2006. Counsel Alan S. Ritchie, counsel for Kent Hovind, and these are to the Honorable U.S. District Judge, perfected jury instructions. So this is telling. This is what I want the jury to hear. So this is generally after trial, what I want the jury to hear because this is what they have to prove. So maybe you're right. It could be something I'm missing here, but
no, there's no way because he wouldn't have been. If he was attorney of record at the time that they, then it would have been Hovind. It would have been his lawyer proceeding on instruction from Hovind to not put on a presentation, not to put on a defense. No, but my recollection again, I maybe I just remember it wrong, but I thought he'd actually fired his lawyers. He just okay.
Maybe
my take on it, by the way,
you could be totally right. I want to make sure. I'm not sure. I'm just reading. These are just what the documents I have. They say this guy Alan whatever is the one who wrote them. So I'm like, all right. It just seems like he was there.
Yeah. Well, the part of the record that would be germane to what I'm saying here is that at some point Hovind made an express waiver of his right to present a defense at trial, and he either made that step, and the judge would hear that waiver and evaluate it. And I'm saying that the presentation from Hovind, the presentation that Hovind, the defendant, wished to waive his right to put on a defense, that presentation has to be made by a person to the court. So was it Hovind pro se, or was it Alan Ritchie? Right, somebody has to be the face of that motion. Right, you don't make a motion as a group. There has to be some friend of the court that does it.
No, you're right.
Whether it's the defendant himself.
No, you're right. You're right. I'm trying to look to see because when you look through the documents, it doesn't really say it, but they're all signed by this attorney. So, but you may be right.
Yeah, no, he probably was still attorney. Yeah. Well, just on the issue of whether or not Hovind could have put on a defense, and I'm actually now thinking from what you're telling me that it was actually his lawyer that provided the waiver, but obviously on instruction from his client. Probably because he was refusing. He's just like, oh, this is bullshit. Could he have an actual defense? And I think based on the weight of the documentary evidence and like as you're saying, the bank records, all that stuff, but also because by the time they'd gone to trial, so they got the indictment and did the arrest, and then Hovind was released, and then later picked up again and put in jail. And during the pretrial phase, they ended up having a whole bunch of recordings to him that spoke to his guilt, according to the prosecution anyway. They had jailhouse recordings of things he was saying to other people, and it added to his guilt. But they'd acquired that information after the indictment, but before the jury was sworn in. So it was all admissible. And so they had him, as far as I'm concerned, they had him pretty well sunk. Before they swore in the jury, they had him sunk. So I think that what a smart lawyer would have done was said, okay, let's talk about a plea deal. Let's talk about a framework for reprimand of this person who made these mistakes with his taxes that doesn't involve a decade-long prison term. That's what a smart lawyer would have done.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's the number one thing you do. You after you see, because, and don't get me wrong, hate even saying this, and I hate the fact that it's going to be recorded, but the structuring laws are fucked up. They are. And it's not about, it's one of those things where it's like almost like statutory rape, where, you know, where if you do it, you're guilty, and no matter what the excuse. And there's a huge case from Maryland, in where you had I think it was a 20-year-old black male, and he had the mental capacity of like a 12-year-old. And there was and he was staying in a house with a family, and there was a young woman there, and she was 15. She was 15 years old. So he's 19 with a 12-year-old or 13-year-old mindset, and she's 15. They had sex, and she became pregnant, and they prosecuted him. And then when they try to bring out this evidence about his mental state and all that stuff, it was like, well, it doesn't matter because, you know, it is what it is. It's definitely, he's over the age, she's under the age, he's going to be prosecuted. So now this is a convicted sex offender, even though he had the mental capacity of a 12-year-old. And I'm saying that because with structuring, if you go to the bank and make these deposits of $9,999 and you continuously do it, you're committing structuring. Now, even though the intent piece of trying to avoid the banking requirements is something the government has to prove, but a lot of times it's just the fact that you've done it is a proof enough. It's just like me taking I see somebody's wallet on the table, I take it. The fact that my intent is kind of proven through the act of the fact that, yeah, you knew it wasn't yours, so you took it. That's the intent. The intent can be inferred, and the same thing with the structuring. So I don't like the way the structuring laws are written, because the government doesn't really have to prove that you intended to do it. That's why if you look at videos on this, you'll see a lot of victims where people will be like, hey, you know, my business happens to take in like $8,000 a month. So when I deposit it, now they've frozen all my accounts and convicted me and told me saying I'm structuring. So I think that piece of it is messed up. But with Hovind, what got Hovind convicted really got him fact that he had made these admissions in jail, like you're saying, that yes, I deliberately kept the amounts under $10,000 as to avoid the bank reporting requirements. That is textbook structuring, and he should have looked for a deal. Another thing that I think he should have done is he should have played it off of his wife. In other words, if you make a deal, his wife could have been set free, because you could have made her be a witness for the prosecution. She could have flipped, but instead of doing that, if he takes the deal, he's not going to get 10 years. He's probably going to get like 3 to 4 years. He's got to pay back the money, and his wife doesn't go to prison. But again, when you get that narcissistic personality, you just want to say, fuck it, I'm going to go down with the ship, and my wife's going to go down with the ship. And that's unfortunately, she got caught up, and that's probably why they're not together anymore. So he did have a defense, but I think he just was so, you know, fuck it, you know, I'm right, that he had no choice but to do his 10 years in prison. And now he's I don't know if you guys know, he's now trying to get the president to pardon him.
Well, 50-50. Did you say he had a defense? He didn't. I just don't see any. By the time they set it for trial, they had so much evidence against him, and things that had spoken to intent. And I just think he was done. Do you actually think he had a defense?
Do I? No. I think a defense could have been put on in a sense of, with this, when you have this type of crime, this structuring, you can play fawn in the woods. Like, hey, who knows about this crime? You know, who's ever put money in a bank? Hey, you could be structuring, because that's the way you plan to play with the jury, almost jury nullification to some extent. But I think when you have the evidence that they had, then the only thing he could have done is plead. And I think a plea bargain, he could have probably gotten probation or something like this. You know, hey, we didn't know, hey, we're good Christians, that type of thing. And you're in the South, they're going to be a lot more lenient on you. But he didn't. She chose not to do it. I would have put on the defense for him, but I don't think his lawyers thought it was hopeless after, especially you have him on tape saying that shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I just don't. Yeah, well, it's because he was on tape. I can see that, you know, the doe in the woods sort of an approach for somebody who can argue that they simply didn't know about these laws. But if you listen to the jailhouse recordings, you'll recognize immediately that there are two parts of the reporting requirements, and it's very obvious that Hovind knew about one of them and didn't know about the other one. So what I'm referring to here is the mandatory reporting for each individual transaction. Any transaction that exceeds $10,000 has to be reported. And second, so that's the one he knew about, because you hear him refer to that in tapes. He kept saying, he said,
he said
make sure you never take more than $10,000. Yeah. The thing he didn't know was a more recent revision, like that's a 1973 law or something, a more recent revision, that it becomes reportable if there is a persistent pattern of doing transactions slightly lower than $10,000. He didn't know about that. And it's obvious that he was taken by surprise by it. Yeah, but my point is that he at least knew about the structuring law. So he knew that there are two reporting requirements. He knew about one of them, but didn't know about the other one. And it doesn't matter. He didn't need to know about both of them. The fact that he knew about one of them and then had taken steps to get around the reporting requirements for the one requirement that he did know, that is like textbook definition of structuring for the purpose of evading these reporting requirements.
You're 100% correct. So, yep. They had him. I agree. Poor Mr. Kent Hovind, he was caught with his panties down. But again, when you're generally caught like that, people cut deals, and I think he just, he was just so not, he was innocent. He didn't want to cut a deal, and I respect that. Hey, I'm innocent. I'm not going to cut a deal. So he went down with the ship and got 10 years, which is crazy, but that's him.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think he was that's what I'm saying. Like I think that's what a smart lawyer would have done, was gone right for the plea deal, right? Go to a privilege conference and say, yeah, he, in exchange for this, he'll, because I think he was a very good candidate for a very favorable plea deal, including a delay.
Did you say anything about the bed to Aaron? Yeah. And he's gonna. Yeah.
But you know what, you say that, but it's tough because like I've had clients who just don't want to take a plea deal for anything. Like no matter, like I'm saying, like, here's the video, this, and they're saying I'm going to trial, and I'm like, well, going to trial it's crazy. They're going to trial, and I actually had one guy. They had him on video. They had him lying. He had wrote statements to the police, and great, and it was I'll say this. It was one of my biggest mistakes in Stone Out. So I got this criminal defendant, and he makes statements to the police, more or less that he did the crime or whatever. And so I was able to get those statements tossed. I was like, yeah, we got a victory. But getting those statements tossed gave my client so much bolster that he said, okay, I want to go to trial now. They don't have those statements. I'm like, but they still got the videotape. They still got the witnesses. They still got this. The statements out gives us better plea bargaining negotiation rather than going to trial. And he's like, no, let's go to trial. And then we go to trial, and now you got all these people testifying, and the jury sitting there crying in the damn jury box. And I'm like, and then it gets to the point where now it went from, they offered my client 1 year right at the beginning. I got him 1 year on probation. And then at the end, after the prosecution closed their case, we tried to get it thrown out. No, you're going to go to the jury. Said, we're going to give you 10 years because you made us put on the case. So he went from 1 year in prison to 10 years in prison, and he could have actually gotten 25. So we got him 10 years in prison, and he said, I'll take the 10. And that was just because he felt that because he didn't have that statement that he would get out. But he's too stupid to take the 1 year. And I think that's Kent Hovind. No matter what deal, if you bought him 1 year and said they're going to offer you 1 year in prison, he wouldn't have took that deal. He had to do the 10 years. Clients who just do that, and you got to stand right next to them and listen to the judge give them years like candy, 10 years in prison.
Yeah. Well, no part of me is saying that he had bad lawyers. I don't know. I mean, I know the lawyers have to respect the wishes of their clients, and sometimes they're dumb, when they do dumb things, but you got to respect it and you got to make the best of it. So I don't have a problem with that. I guess my issue is that collectively the defense, and as I say, even acting on instruction from a dim-witted client who's self-aggrandizing, like whether it came from Hovind or whether the lawyer thought it was a good idea, whatever. The point I'm saying, there was a bad approach to that trial, because I think he would have been a very good candidate for a plea deal. Because like if you think about a different situation, a lot of people are caught for that structuring because they're running an illegal drug enterprise. And the problem is, then you walk them in, you say, well, it's a little tax law thing, little banking reporting slip up. So, we'll take probation. Well, one of the conditions that the prosecution is going to insist on is a complete recital of all the criminal enterprise. So now the person has to admit to the drug offenses and commit to going a period of time without committing any crime whatsoever. you know, the drug manufacturers, like if it's a meth lab or something, like you're not going to be, that's already, you're not going to be a sympathetic defendant.
But Hogtie, do you think they could get him to allocute though? Do you think they could have really gotten Kit Hovind to allocute that he was guilty
not.
of?
Definitely not. Yeah. No, definitely not.
And that's probably what he's at. You know, you got to tell him you committed the fraud. I'd rather do 10 years.
Someone's asking,
what
would the pardon be since he's already done the time?
No criminal record. He can then say, well, he because now the criminal conviction won't just be wiped away. So it's like you weren't convicted.
What would
even
be
though
the
you were?
advantages of that?
Let's say if you're trying to apply for a job, and especially it's huge in court. Like sometimes if you're practicing in federal court, there's a rule in the federal rules of evidence here in the states in which if you've been convicted of a crime, then I can impeach you for your character of truthfulness based on that conviction. So if you, and in general it's a felony. So if you've been convicted of a felony, I can then bring up to the jury if you ever get in trouble again that you've been convicted of a felony and you're less likely to be able to tell the truth. But if you were pardoned, it should never happen. So now you're just like everyone else. So there are implications on job forms and things of that nature. So it's really a pardon is like a gift. And it all depends on what type of pardon. Obviously, there's reprievals and all that. But if you're talking about a full pardon, then you're yeah, it's the gold standard. Like, thank God.
Yeah. Yeah, well, so watch that for a second. I think you're okay. If he gets arrested again for something else, and so he's a defendant in another criminal proceeding, it would not be the case that they could bring up the fact that he already has a conviction. That would actually not be something that would be part of that trial. I think what you mean to say is that anytime he puts himself on the stand, when he's giving sworn testimony, even in his own defense, like whether he's testifying in another trial or testifying at his own trial, then the conviction can be brought forward as part of an effort to impeach his testimony. So if he gets arrested again,
maybe that's true in Canada. I just taught evidence, and federal rules of evidence do not. It literally says pardons, reprievals. If you are pardoned by the president, you cannot be impeached with that evidence.
No. I'm not talking about the. Yeah, no. So I'm not talking about if he gets the pardon. I'm saying he doesn't get the pardon. Let's say he gets arrested tomorrow, right? Like let's look at two cases. He gets arrested tomorrow, and completely unrelated to that, he witnesses a car accident, right? And he has to testify as a witness at the car accident trial, right? Person gets charged with drunk driving or something, and the prosecution wants to bring Hovind on as a witness. His conviction can be mentioned at the other trial as to whether or not he can be relied upon as a truth-speaking witness. But his conviction cannot be brought up at the trial where he is a defendant. So I'm not talking about the pardon. I'm talking about he hasn't got a pardon. Yeah. Now, if he also wants to be a witness at his own trial, that then opens up that rule of evidence that allows the conviction to be brought in an effort to impeach the testimony he's providing. But it can't be used in any sense to try to inform the jury or judge, the finder of fact, that he's guilty. Right? You can't say, well, here's a guy who's being accused of robbing a gas station. Oh, and by the way, he was convicted of like 44 structuring charges. Like that's not how that works. It's only if he elects. So if he gets arrested again and he doesn't elect to testify, his old conviction, pardoned or otherwise, are just still stuck on his record. It doesn't matter. It can't come up.
I'll say this: in the United States, it's extremely hard. Convictions. And I'm just saying it is really, really difficult. And like, for instance, the case that I was prosecuting was a ticket scalper. One of my first cases. And, ticket scalpers are misdemeanors. And this guy had something like 137 convictions for ticket scalping. And during our motion to eliminate, the judge said, and guess what? He got caught ticket scalping again. The judge made it very, very clear. He was like, listen, you can't even use the word ticket scalping. It's just the fact that it's on the charge. You cannot say anything about this guy ticket scalping before, even though he has all these convictions, felony, misdemeanor, you cannot use, because it's the old adage, once a thief, always a thief. So I had to go through a whole trial pretending that this guy had no ticket scalping convictions. But I was able to get every one of those in. And the reason why is because He didn't take the stand, but his mother took the stand. And on the stand, his mother, you know, the defense attorney, who happened to be a legal aid attorney, was asking, like, okay, what do you think about your son? And she said, oh, my son, he's a law-abiding citizen. He's never been in any trouble. He's a good boy. Now,
ouch.
All those convictions. So my first thing when I got up to question the mother, I said, oh, you said he's law-abiding. She said, yes. So I said, well, did you know he has 137 convictions for ticket scalping? And, you know, objection. The judge is, you know, slamming. No, come up. And when I went up, I said, well, she's just said that he was, you know, that he is a law-abiding citizen. He's got 137 convictions. That, you know, I'm challenging her knowledge on whether he's a law-abiding citizen, because that is something the jury should hear. It's actually not the jury. It's actually the judge is the jury in that case. And the judge said, yeah, you're right. You can bring it up because the mother said that he was a law-abiding citizen. So all 137 convictions were then brought in, and to show that this guy had all these convictions, and that, you know, the mother's her saying that he was a law-abiding citizen wasn't really as accurate. And you know what? This judge, because we're in a very liberal city, this guy was found not guilty because the judge said it didn't matter. It was a judge's trial. There's nothing you can do, even with bringing in 137 convictions. So,
can I just point out something scientist Sam pointed out at the side? It says, "LOL, hogtie arguing law with the lawyer," and it just kind of reminds me of, you know, Kent Hovind arguing science with Maute, who's a scientist.
Oh no! I want to say this, please. Hogtie is very, very good. He's corrected me many times. So just because, you know, I'm a lawyer, I don't know all the laws. Hogtie is very, very knowledgeable. So
we do sometimes have
many times on the law, and he's been one of the correct. So I'm
only chuckling at the parallel.
Oh
no! I'm barking. Not the argument. I'm not taking a jab at Hogtie. I just find it really funny. That was
and I do it in part to poll, because there are some differences, like on these evidence rules. I mean, the same thing would have happened in Canada. That same story, the guy's got previous convictions. It wouldn't have been allowed to be brought out at trial. Certainly, if he made the claim himself, like if he was a witness or just was even a witness. But even so, you have the mother come in. Now, the one thing you would have to change in your language is that when she said, "Oh, I know he's a good person. He's a law-abiding citizen. He's never been in any trouble," you wouldn't be allowed to say, well, did you know that he was convicted of 137, right? Because that would be an example of testifying, what's it called? Testifying from the, I forget what it's called. When a lawyer testifies.
Yeah, we call it cross. That's what cross, well, again, in the States, it's funny because when I was a prosecutor, I never did cross examinations. It was always, you know, I did, but it was really just direct examinations, because usually the defense doesn't put on a defense. You know, they'll say I didn't prove my case. But when you have, when you're a defense attorney, you only do cross examinations. And here in the States, examining like when I cross examine the prosecution's witnesses, they're not testifying. It's all yes or no questions, and they are just stooges up there. I'm the one who's actually testifying. Did you do this? Yes or no? Did you do this? Yes or no? This, everything that they're getting, everything the jury's going to hear is from me. If I ask that witness on there on cross-examination an open-ended question, like, how did you feel that day or something like that? I'm a bad attorney. And I'll even put a link in where any attorney on cross-examination should only be asking closed questions, leading questions that are closed, and the witness is only supposed to say yes or no. All the information is coming out of my mouth. I'm actually testifying on cross-examination, not the witness. I know it sounds like it's that's the way it works here.
Yeah. Well, I'm pointing out a fairly silly distinction in the rules of evidence, in that you would not be allowed to say, "Did you know?" Like, ask any witness, especially one adversarial to your purpose. Did you know? And then fact X, because you're now inserting fact X into the record of the trial when you're not a sworn witness, so you wouldn't be allowed to do that. However, what you are allowed to say is, would it surprise you to learn, or what if I told you that your son had 137 convictions? Would that surprise you? You're allowed to frame it in the hypothetical and ask the witness if it's something that would surprise them. And the site I wish I remember the site. It's Brown and something. I can't remember. Damn it. But anyway, yeah, it's a strange distinction, because you can't say, "Did you know X?" But you can say, "Would it surprise you if X were true?" And if the witness, If the witness, well, this is a sort of specifically Canadian thing because it originally had arisen from case law, where they decided this distinction was somehow important, and somehow protected their rights. So the procedure is, you say, did you know, or sorry, would it surprise you to learn that he actually has more than one conviction? Would it surprise you to learn that he actually has more than 10 convictions? I have a document here, Your Honor. May I show this document to the witness to refresh your memory? Refresh her memory. You're not allowed to say what the document is. You have to show it in passing the defense table. Show them the document so the defense is familiar with what you're showing the witness, but you can't show it to the judge or the clerk or the jury. And then you would then show what would be a record of convictions or whatever, their person's criminal record. And then you can ask them, does that record assist your memory in whether or not this person has had, for example, more than 10 convictions? Right? It's a very strange process, but it's there to prevent lawyers from testifying. If the dispute continues, then if you can get somebody to authenticate that document that you've shown the witness, then you can enter the document into the record. But it's like that 5-step process.
You know what I'll say, everyone in here, if you're really interested about how we think about cross-examination and testifying as a witness, there's go to YouTube and type in the 10 commandments for cross-examination. They teach this in every law school. It's extremely old video, and they literally tell you the process of how to do a cross-examination. And in that recitation, and make mention, it is the attorney on cross-examination, it is the attorney who is testifying, and the witness who's just the prop. Now, again, that may just be the differences in the legal system, but for here, if that witness says anything other than yes or no, then I'm asking the judge, is that a yes or is that a no? You'll see that, if you watch Law and Order, for instance, you'll see that. But it's really the lawyer that's testifying. But and a lot of the procedural things you said are actually true. You can't add facts, but the fact that she's saying he's law abiding, then I can definitely I can challenge it. And it's funny because here a lot of people don't know, but a lot of times the judges too are kind of ignorant to the rules. Are ignorant to something like, say, hearsay. Like, I'll say something is hearsay and the judge says it's not hearsay, and then I have to go and argue with the judge that this is actually hearsay and pull out the rule book and say, no, look, this is the definition of hearsay. So, we all make mistakes, and you're right. Maybe it's in the form of the question, but I've asked that question many times and I've never had a problem. So.
I think a lot of times the advice that lawyers give each other is reflecting a bit of lawyer culture. And I do see a big difference in lawyer culture between our two countries. Because I sort of see where that sentiment comes from. That you have to approach it like you're the one trying to get these facts into the record. And there's a great way of putting it, too, that the witness is merely a prop in your effort into establishing those facts into the record. And it fits well within the sort of trial climate and the lawyer culture in the U.S. In Canada, there's a very, very strong resistance to allowing lawyers to enter the facts into the record. The lawyer is to use the witness as their conduit for getting desired information into the record. And that includes documentary evidence. So lawyers, for example, you cannot reach it. That's why I was using the example of when you ask a witness, is this something, I have a piece of paper that might assist your memory here. You simply cannot reach into your briefcase and pull out a piece of paper and wave it around like it's somehow meaningful.
Of course. Oh,
you can't tell anything.
No. I've actually done that before. It's because here the rules of evidence allow you to do. In other words, if I'm not going to present it to evidence or anything like that, like what I'll do is I'll pick up a piece of paper and I'll act like I'm reading from it. And I'll ask the question. Have you ever said blah 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 blah? And the paper I have in my hand is blank. It's a little bit of theater, but I'm not presenting this in the evidence. And other concern. I don't know. It's just, sometimes it's theater because the person said it, you have a piece of paper in your hand, and the fact, I pick up my pad and I'll say, have you ever said this looking at my pad? Then that person doesn't know what I'm about to do or what I'm about to say. And, and hopefully they'll answer truthfully. 99% of the time they'll say, yeah, well, I said that. And then, they'll see on my desk, it's just a blank sheet of paper, oh, you got them. So it all depends. Again, it all depends on the culture you're saying. And I think here we have a more adversarial culture. That's where you can do things like that.
Well, it's funny because when I was in high school and I used to ditch, we had court only one day a week in my town. And I used to quite often ditch school on Wednesday to go watch the trials in this little small town. And or not just the trials, all the court proceedings. I just found that stuff interesting. And my uncle was practicing at the time. And one day his friend of mine was like, oh, why do you do that? He said, oh, come on along. So he was actually along for this one. And it was funny because my uncle actually did what you're saying about that little bit of theater. And it blew up in his face. And it was funny because we were sitting there. And at one point, one of the facts at issue was that one of the witnesses had to go to the hospital at some point to get something checked out with his foot, which may or may not have been broken related to the incident. And he asked, oh, so you went to this hospital. What day was it? Oh, well, could it have been the Wednesday, not the Friday? He goes, no, it was definitely Friday. And he says, and he picked up his briefcase and he set it on the second counsel chair. There's only one lawyer there, so the other chair was empty. He set his briefcase on the chair, and he goes, would it surprise you to learn, again, so under that Brown and whatever, I forget what the case is called, but under that rule, you're allowed to ask the question that way. Would it surprise you to learn that the hospital, he says the name of the hospital, has a record of admission for them seeing you for your foot on the Wednesday? And the witness really paused and strained, and he goes, yeah, that I don't know, because I'm really, really sure it was Friday. So my uncle kind of fumbled through his papers a little bit, and then the next thing he said was, thank you, Your Honor, I have no further questions, and he sat down. Oh, sorry, I forgot. Partway through, when that happened, when he goes, would it surprise you? My friend leans over to me, he goes, he's got it in his briefcase. And like we were going to watch like the most salacious, like awesome gotcha moment any lawyers ever pulled off in this hillbilly town. And but then he goes, no further questions, and he sat down. So I'd seen my uncle at the lake. So he was there on the weekend. We'd stay at the cabin up there, and he was up there. And I said, well, that was really interesting, but why did you do that? And he said, well, I was pretty sure that the witness wasn't telling the truth. But he goes, you know what, as a lawyer, what are you going to do when your own client lies to you? So the story was that he was informed by his client of a certain set of facts, and he believed them to be the case and thought the witness to be lying, and did everything he could to nudge the witness around and get him to admit what he understood to be the truth based on what the client told him. And then he then found out that the client was lying, like lied to his own lawyer.
Oh yeah, that guy went to jail. They always lie all the time. Well, you know, I don't want to say all clients lie, but you know they're trying to continue the story, and even when the story is broken down. I'll tell you, it's interesting for us. You know, for us in the profession, like the best examine a witness, and this is good for anybody. If you guys are ever going to be in a case in the United States, some of the principles, the best attorney is a very good attorney. You want to be able to ask questions. Like I've gotten good at it, in which I can start asking questions by just saying one word, you know, and that's what you want to get to. You want to get to your questions being so precise, and so where your question with the least amount of words, you're trying to get the point across, and the least amount of questions. That's really the best type of cross-examination you can get. Where you can get the least amount of words and get to the point as succinctly as possible, so everybody can understand it. And here's a good example of it. Since we're talking about the presidency, Nixon, when he was being impeached, and they were doing the impeachment trials, and the prosecutor, Nixon had his guy, and his guy was up there talking about this, you know, oh, well, really, it happened this way. It was, you know, all kind of just messed up. So the prosecutor gets up to cross-examine this witness, and he asked the witness just one question. Says, were you born on December 7th, 1953 or something like that? It was like 750s or 40s. You know, were you born on this date? And the guy says, yeah, I was born on that date. No further questions. So everybody's like, what the hell? This guy just asked him one question and said, no further questions. That's, you know, this is ridiculous. But the jury was captivated, like, oh my God, this, you know, why did he ask this guy just one question? So then the prosecutor gets up after for summations, and he says, remember that guy that was up here that he said, you know, the thing happened, blah, 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 blah. And he said, you remember that guy was up here? And then, you know, all the jury's shaking their head, yes. And then he said, remember the question I asked that guy, that one question I asked him? You know, do you guys remember the question? The jury's shaking their head, yes, right? And he's like, yeah, the question was, were you born on this day? And he said, yes. And the jury's shaking their head, yes. And he said the reason. He said, but most of you guys probably are going to be thinking, why did I ask him only that one question? Like everybody's like captivated, and he says, because to believe his story, born yesterday, and I just wanted to make sure he wasn't born yesterday. That had gotten the point across.
That's cool.
And everybody knew, because everybody was on their heels trying to figure out what was the point of that one question. And that is an artist's determination and using it to clear up the case. And obviously Nixon had to resign. So it just shows you when the purpose of cross-examination, sometimes that witness is just the prop to get the point across. And the point across, that guy, everything he was saying was bullshit. And that's what everybody now who's heard that story now knows.
There are two people I would love to see on the witness stand. And one of them makes me chuckle because he's been, as soon as someone said, one of them's Donald Trump, because he ad-libs too much and he's likely to open his mouth in his ego and thwart the entire case. And he had lawyers who said, okay, you do not want to do this. And he said, oh, I want to do it. And then suddenly he's like, yeah, I resign. Forget it. I'm not interested in doing this. I'm not going to put my reputation on the line and watch this guy just fold immediately because he can't keep his mouth shut.
Laura, actually, there's a... Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go on.
There's actually a video of him under cross-examination where it was for one of his, bombed real estate legal things. He got out.
Sorry to interrupt. Deposition.
Deposition. Thank
Deposition.
you.
Go ahead.
He was asked to read a certain section, and he goes, "It's very long," proving it. Actually, just not proving, but reestablishing the fact that he is functionally illiterate. So, if you ever want to see his behavior when he is being part of a deposition, check that out. Just Google Donald Trump deposition, you'll find it. It's got a blue background.
Yeah, it's the reason. This is exactly the reason why they want the questions beforehand, and they just want to do a written deposition, because they know that if he gave an audible one, if he actually made a deposition with his mouth, that his habit of ad-libbing and just adding a little bit of information in there, and going off on a weird tangent somewhere would just pull the rug under his feet.
What's really interesting is when they try to keep him on a teleprompter, he sounds so unnatural too. It's like he can't even, he sounds so. It's like it's hard to talk logically, isn't it?
Yeah,
like he's a salesman. That's why it always has to be the best ever, the smartest ever, the biggest ever, because that bolstering is, I think, what he's been used to doing to sell his buildings and all that stuff. And when you understand, doing that stuff starts turning into lies.
I would love to see him examined by a really skilled lawyer who is very familiar with Trump's speaking style and with his personality defects. That'd be delightful to see.
All right, I need to craft an axe, and I can't find the materials in here. Let's see.
What you were saying, Laura?
I was just looking. I was just trying to find it because there's that comical one where he's talking about the Iran nuclear deal and the speech that he gives, and he just sort of goes off in this weird tangent about his uncle and, how he went to a good school, and it's just like all over the place. You're just thinking, what on earth is this guy talking about?
Well, yeah, and he was interviewed, and someone asked about his interview with, I can't remember who it was. It might have been Macron or whatever, and he started talking about an eclair. He spent more time talking about the eclair than he did about the subject. We had the most wonderful chocolate cake while missiles were flying at Iran. You mean Iraq? Yeah, Iraq. Or no, Syria. I'm sorry. Yeah.
I'm trying to find it because it's
horrible witness.
It's such.
I'm still baffled. That thing in the Rose Garden was so bizarre yesterday, especially that moment when they asked about, you're declaring an emergency, and he goes, and we're going to get sued, and we'll probably lose, and we get a bad ruling, and we're going to lose again, and then we'll go to the Supreme Court. I don't know if you guys had seen that clip, but it is so bizarre.
Actually, something very interesting is going on at the Supreme Court that I think a lot of people aren't really noticing.
Before you go off there, I've got that speech, and it's only 1 minute 32 seconds, so it's not long to listen to.
Play it.
Have a listen to this.
Having nuclear, my uncle was a great professor and scientist and engineer, Dr. John Trump at MIT. Good genes, very good genes, okay? Very smart. The Wharton School of Finance, very good.
Oh,
very
my God.
You know, if you're a conservative Republican, if I were a liberal, if I ran as a liberal Democrat, they would say I'm one of the smartest people everywhere in the world. It's true. But when you're a conservative Republican, they try, do they do a number? That's why I always started, went to Wharton, was a good student, went there, did this, built the, I have to give my credentials all the time because we're at a little disadvantage. But you look at the nuclear deal, the thing that really bothers me, it would have been so easy, and it's not as important as these lives are. Nuclear is so powerful. My uncle explained that to me many, many years ago, the power, and that was 35 years ago. He would explain the power of what's going to happen, and he was right. Who would have thought? But when you look at what's going on with the 4 prisoners, now it used to be 3, now it's 4. But when it was 3, and even now, I would have said it's all in the messenger. Fellas, and it is fellas because, they haven't figured that the women are smarter right now than the men are. It's going to take them about another 150 years. But the Persians are great negotiators. The Iranians are great negotiators. So, and
Persians and the Iranians.
What the?
Both of them. If you think that's bad to listen to, have someone read that as a transcript. They would not be able to follow it.
Yeah.
It's so funny.
It's like, getting back on the subject was the nuclear, and then he goes off on a tangent again. I just found that I find that hilarious to read.
Yeah. But that's the con man game. Like when I was in law enforcement, that's the con man game is, hey, how much for this watch? This is a great watch, blah blah blah. And then he takes you off on a tangent. Hey, what'd you think about the Knicks last night? What'd you think about this? Now you're not talking about the watch anymore. Then all of a sudden, I gotta go. Do you want the watch? Is that a great deal? You buy the watch, and next thing you know, the watch is like, it's a fake watch. That's the whole New York fast talking salesman pitch routine. You get a topic and you take it off topic because you want to just get that rapport with the person. And then when you get them to say the yes, then you're out of there.
Yeah. Well, have you ever like if as a law enforcement officer, like interviewed somebody, not like somebody who's like a polished liar, but just a low level, incidental criminal almost, right? And you ask a simple question. Okay, so then where is the car now? Like, where did you leave it?
Yeah.
And they'll say, well, my cousin Jessica had a wart on her foot and she had a doctor's appointment and then they were going to freeze it, but then they got what did I ask you?
Well, that brings up the other up the other person I'd love to hear in court, and that would be G-Man. Because you can just imagine that things aren't going the way that he would like. So he says, right, I'm going to fire my lawyer and I'm going to represent myself. And the prosecution or whatever you want to call them, they basically kind of mentally snigger to themselves and think this guy's a fucking idiot. This is just going to be crazy.
He would be in contempt within like 15 seconds.
Oh, yeah.
BRB AFK.
I mean, there's no two ways around it. I just think, he'd be like, somebody say, this is kangaroo court. He goes, whoa, not in Australia.
Yeah.
He's so stupid.
Oh, dear me. Can you imagine? I mean, the problem is, I would feel really sorry for the stenographer. It was like, was that 5 woes or 7?
And she'd have to, do spell check every 5 seconds.
Yeah.
Or he.
It's so even when I talk to G-Man about stupid legal stuff, it's so funny because he just doesn't understand the simplest concept. Like, he's in Texas. I'm like, yeah, G-Man, don't forget, he doesn't live in New Jersey. He lives in Texas. There's a whole different thing. I'm going out to Texas. To do what, G-Man? Why are you going out to Texas? To talk to the cops. You're going out to, it's like he has this understanding of it that doesn't understand that, you have to commit some type of crimes. You have to prove certain things. You can't just tell the cops, this guy said something bad to me on the internet and they're going to go lock you up. There's rules to the game. And I tried to explain it to him, but he just doesn't want to listen. He doesn't care. He just thinks that you can do it, and he's going to do it.
So you did know that he invited me to come up to New York so he could show the cops to me and tell me that I'm stalking him after he invited me up to New York to get
That was hilarious.
Which is just you're stalking. Yeah. How can you stalk somebody if they're inviting you to come?
Yeah, make sure you don't email him the invite, because then that's
I mean, let's not forget that Richard Raspberry was a deceitful little bitch and deleted his name from his G+ profile just so he could call people stalker. G-Man's not even that smart. He is stupid enough to say, come up here so I can call you a stalker to the police.
Yeah, he's probably called the local precinct a whole bunch of times. This guy Dragnot is bothering me. 911. We need. Didn't he make the 911 call?
I
remember he did a video with the 911 call.
He was on. He did a live stream as far as we know, he was on the phone, but.
Yeah,
but listen,
police, Interpol. I want to go after Cliff Jumper for saying that I stole a safe, and it's like, sir, this is Interflora.
But one thing I want to give everybody before I leave, I want to give everybody just a piece of advice, and that's if you're in the States and the police are questioning you about a crime and you have done something wrong, it's best not to say anything than to try to get yourself out of it. And I'll tell you, I remember there was a case when I was an investigator, and there was a case that I had in which I had the person burglarizing a business. I had all the evidence I needed. I had everything I needed. But you know what? Fuck it. Let me just have a conversation with the guy to make the case even more solid. So what did I do? Brought the guy into the room, asked him if he wanted his attorney. He gives up all his rights. The regular thing that happens here in the United States. Another thing, if I'm asking you, do you want to talk after you've been arrested? You should always say no. You should want an attorney. But this guy, that rarely happens. Everybody wants to talk. So this guy wanted to talk. So this guy tells me he's not done it. He's not none of this. Never, didn't do anything. Wasn't even there. So my next thing was to play the video. Oh, okay. So who's this? Then he tells me everything, how he did it, blah, 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 blah. We had no deal in place. He just gives it all up to me, tells me everything. He did it because of his family, this, writes a statement. So I turn it over to the DA, goes to trial. This guy now wants to fight. Came in. All these statements came in. And the guy then blames me. He says, oh, you screwed me because I wouldn't have said all that stuff if I would have known that you had the videotape. I mean, if I'd have known before that you had the videotape. And I say that to say this. That happens so when I was investigating crimes, it happens so frequently. It is ridiculous, especially with people stalking people online, or like we had a lot of times where we had students who would do the sex with what they would like they would have an ex-girlfriend they hated, then they would put all their personal, they put 6 videos up online, and you grab the guy, and now he's talking. So if you ever have an issue with law enforcement, they're bringing you in and you're under arrest and they want to talk to you, because it never goes well. I've gotten more people convicted based on their own statements. It is incredibly easy, and we're trained. We're actually trained to do this. It's incredibly easy to get people to confess. And people always say, why did the person confess? How did they get a confession? I've never beat a confession out of anybody. The worst I've done is buy somebody a soda, and they confess their crimes to you like they're a priest. So if you're listening to this and you get caught up in anything, those people, make them prove their case, because a lot of times you're proving it for them.
I mean, that was the whole point when G-Man got upset about me saying that he was guilty of third-degree theft, because I didn't say he actually stole a safe in shorthand. I said, he's guilty of theft, because and I laughed about it when he said he wanted to take me to court, because it's like, okay, go ahead. You'll have to come to the UK to do it. You can't just go to like your local police station and, expect me to turn up. No, I live in a different country. And this is a civil matter. This isn't a criminal matter.
Yeah, he doesn't understand the difference.
So in order for him to try to go after me, he would have to come to the UK and sue me in civil court. Okay? And he would have to find at least $10,000. He would have to come over, hire a barrister, all that kind of stuff to get his day in court. And what I would do is I would turn up with 2 videos. I would have his video saying what he said happened, and my video where I explained that, or TST or whatever, my video saying what he said, and then saying, but if you look at New Jersey state law and so, it says that if you take property that you do not own over a value of something and something, and you don't hand it over, then that's third-degree theft. And that no one thinks that he actually literally went out with a crowbar to steal something. And, and he didn't think, he didn't sort of buy something he knew to be stolen, which would be second-degree theft. No, this is, theft by, what's it called?
Theft by finding.
Finding, thank you. Yeah. But like I say, he thinks he can just make a big, massive yap on the internet, and he could just go and sue me and take my home and stuff like that, which is rented. But,
Yeah, you think they would own your house? God, it's so funny how all of them think they're going to go to court. Von Helton thinks he's going to win $10 million. I still remember Nephilim Free shouting at us, "I'm going to own all your houses." Like, really? That's how you think the courts work? By the way, Laura, just as a point of, you may have noticed, I don't say, well, G-Man stole a safe or G-Man's guilty of theft. For one thing, I don't believe those things to be true. I don't think that any of that actually happened. What I say is G-Man has confessed to all the elements of theft by finding.
Yeah.
Because his story is a confession that he had committed this crime. He won't admit that it's a crime, but he admits to all of the elements that would have been required to get him convicted. But I don't think his confession is honest. So I usually put it like, well, he's so desperate to prove this answered prayer nonsense that, these miracles happen as long as you're a true, real Christian, that he makes up these stories. Like that he prayed to God to find him a wife, and that's how he got married. And he prayed to God for some money, and that's how he found a safe.
Oh yeah.
These. So and then we had the discussion separately. I know MP's already chimed in. I don't even know that even if that story's true, I don't even think he's convictable under. I mean, he's certainly guilty of the common law idea of what theft by finding is, and he would be held responsible to give the money back. But
yeah, he's
at
not.
Worst.
But to who though? To who?
I looked up the statute of limitations for third-degree theft in New Jersey is 3 years, and this happened at least 5 years ago. So he's off scot-free. The worst that could possibly happen is one of the claims, because the claim changed, which suggests it's not true. But the first one is he just found this stuff in the garbage, and then people pointed out, yeah, that's actually, if you didn't hand it into the police, well, that's stealing. That's theft. And then he switched it to, well, someone got evicted. Well, if someone got evicted, that's their stuff. No, someone had a fire. Sorry, that was it. There was a fire, and it was their stuff that was thrown out in the garbage, and he picked it up and kept it. And it's like, well, wait a second.
That makes sense.
If they lost everything, managed to get back the $3,000 they had in a little safe thing, a lockbox thing, that would be really useful to them. Oh, well, they've been evicted and they got thrown out, so it becomes okay that way. The story shifted and changed.
Laura, one thing, the story has shifted and changed, but I'm always confused with this, and I'm always confused with Jersey law. So my ignorance is going to show. But from my understanding, there's a difference between something being discarded in trash versus somebody losing something. If something is discarded, and some localities would say, well, even if it's discarded in the trash, you can't go through the trash because for health reasons and so on. So that, let's say if something was discarded in the trash, and someone was to pick something up and found like $1 million or something in the trash, that's a different scenario than if someone finds a safe that's not in the trash, it's maybe behind, maybe next to somebody's house or something like that, and finds it. So I'm
well, that was a part of his original story. His
Right, 'cause I'm
original
trying to figure
story
out-
was that, he, his sister was getting kicked out. He needed some money. Went to the church, went to his family. No one would give him any money. So he prayed to God, and like a day or two later, he went around the side of the house and he found this, he found a CD player, some CDs, and a locked safe. And he gave the CD player and CDs to his sister, and took it to the safe to his brother, and his brother wouldn't help him. He took it to his father, he lent him a hammer, and he smashed into this thing, and eventually opened up, and there was $3,000 in it. And that's proof of God. That was his original claim.
Then maybe it's proof of a burglary.
Well, exactly. That's the whole point I was making when, way back. I said, well, let's have a look at a different scenario. Some guys in the hood decided, they went out with a crowbar and they stole someone's, broke into someone's hole, stole their safe, but they didn't want to be found at 3 o'clock in the morning walking down the streets in New Jersey with, CD player and the CDs under one arm and lock safe under the other one. That looks a bit suspicious at 3 o'clock in the morning. So they went and stashed it around the side, expecting to go and pick it up the next day, but G-Man found it before they, could reacquire it. I mean, that's a perfectly good scenario. And of course, what would have happened if he would have opened the safe and there was sort of a kilo of cocaine and a firearm in? Would that be proof of God if he sold them on? I mean,
Well, for me, it would be proof of God and proof of a good time too.
So,
Can you
like I
hear me,
say,
guys?
Yep.
First version of the story, the very first version of the story, was that it was out on the sidewalk after a fire.
So that would be more theft for me. If there was a fire and this is found, and you're talking about a lock safe found out, then now we're talking about something different. But if you're talking about just something found in the trash, I would think of that a little differently than this. But if you're talking about fire and something out, there was a fire and now a lock safe is outside of the building, now we have a totally different scenario.
The first version. The second version then was that people had been evicted and the landlord had put their stuff out on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Now,
theft too.
I do want to point out, Fiona,
that may be a little
wasn't the
less likely.
first. That wasn't the first story, because the first story was him doing it as a prayer thing. What you're talking about are the when people basically tried to rebut it, and he was like, "Hang on, if that's that, then so and so," and then he started with changing these stories and adding what you would just said.
But what I'm saying is that being in a dumpster was not the first version.
Yeah.
So I think he added the dumpster to change the culpability because being outside of a fire, that is a very, very different situation.
Yeah, and then of course later on it changed. It was on the sidewalk.
Well, it began on the sidewalk from the fire.
No, it was around the side of the house. Oh, sorry. Well, again, it changed because the fire and the evicted part didn't happen. If you remember when G-Man was talking to Ronnie and they were trying to say that, oh, well, it did, it doesn't matter because this, that, and the other, legally he can't be done for anything because it was found on the sidewalk.
It's funny because here in some jurisdictions here in the United States, I don't know how it is in England and Canada because you guys hold to the common law a little more boldly than we do. But for us, let's say somebody is evicted from property, and they have the judges of decree they've been evicted, and at that point in some jurisdictions, whatever's left in the apartment after the eviction becomes the whoever owns the property becomes the owner now, and that's not in all jurisdictions but some. And then that property owner would say, okay, I don't want this property, and they discard it by throwing it away. They'll say we're throwing it in the garbage. And if you have a safe or something of valuables and they put it on the sidewalk, then that's counted as discarded property because now the new owner, which is the person who's evicted the tenant, is now saying I don't want that. So that's why if it's from an eviction, it really depends on what jurisdiction you're in, because if it is an eviction and somebody's saying throwing away this property, then it's discarded. It would be hard for me to say that it'd be theft.
I popped in here to ask Hogtie a question. Has he seen the photograph sent him?
I think he's AFK.
Oh, typical, isn't it?
Yeah. By the way, Fiona, did you see that I sent you an invite?
I got that. But that's just typical Hog Ties now going.
Fiona, I love you. Hi.
What are you doing talking?
I was about to say.
No. Guys, actually, I'm feeling a lot better. I just took some painkillers, and there was a lump like on the roof of my mouth from swelling, and it's gone now.
Yay!
Yeah.
Good.
Feel better.
Thank you.
You need to take it easy, missus.
I know. I am.
Better be.
The other day, Jackie came on and Drag pretty much just kept telling her to shut up. It was pretty bad.
Yeah, it's
okay.
No, I know. He was kidding, of course.
You know, the sad thing is, normally we like to hear Jackie talk, and instead we wanted to be quiet.
So we can hear her talk more later. Yeah.
Oh, I can't wait till I'm fully healed, because my speech is gonna be so much better.
Oh, and you'll feel better.
Don't rush it.
Okay.
Did you get a script writer?
A what?
Did you get a speech writer?
A speech writer.
I'm
you
using
say your speech is going to.
Yeah, your speech is going to get
so much better.
Yeah.
Hog Tie Champ has returned.
Ha.
Oh dear me! Gosh, that was the ha 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 in a slow clap kind of way.
Yeah, no, it's pretty good. Well, at least it was amongst the better of yours. Take that how you want.
Tie Champ, I nipped in here to see if you got the image I sent you.
I did, and I did. Sorry, I was just doing dishes, so I have to, dry my hands to unmute and stuff. So I'm a couple topics behind. Yeah, I saw it, and yeah, that bugger's broken. Huh?
Remember,
that was some time ago. I take it.
Yeah, we had a you were, I think there was a conversation going on, and you had said that boys were very, very hard to see, and I said to you, mine wasn't. And I tried to show you the image way back then.
Yeah.
The screen on my iPod was mirrored. Well, I just found it again. But I wanted to show it to Hog Tie Champ. I'm amazed at the things that my memory stacks. Yeah, it's a good one, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Yeah, well, you actually cut out for a second, so people didn't hear which bone you're talking about. She said scaphoid. It's a small pebble-like bone in your wrist. So the carpus, people always talk about this carpal tunnel syndrome. The carpus is actually a little opening through your wrist that all the pipe work goes through. And there's this little sort of collection of bones that fit together like a 3D jigsaw puzzle to maintain that round archway for the stuff to go through. And the scaphoid is the one that's closest to your thumb, and it's notoriously difficult to spot a fracture on an X-ray, and also notoriously difficult to heal, because it's, I think, the only bone in the body that receives its blood supply from the distal end. Most of the bones that that goes in the same side the heart is on, it goes right from an artery right into the bone, and then comes out the other end. But the scaphoid, it actually goes partway up your thumb and makes a little U-turn and goes back to feed the scaphoid. So they're really difficult. The image that Fiona has is a complete scaphoid fracture. It actually goes transversely, like right through, and the bone is actually shifted over a little bit.
Ouch.
Sorry?
Yeah, it goes right through the waist to
the waist. Yeah. So it's slightly barbell shape. It's very short, but it's like barbell shape. But yeah, it's split right through the cortex on both sides. So.
It's a brilliant one, and the worst of it is that I did it by not falling off a horse.
By not falling off
by staying on the horse.
Oh, really?
My horse took a bucking fit as I was getting on her, and I refused to give up on her shoulder, and she gave a huge buck, lean back, and her back hit my back. Elbow was locked as I had my left hand on her shoulder.
Ow.
And I continued riding, and it was only when I went to pull her up I had nothing. I got off, took off all the tack, screaming as I did it, thinking it was a tweak, And then I started to lose schooling her after phoning my husband to say, you need to come and take me to hospital, I think my wrist's broken. The worry with it was because it was completely right the way through, because all the blood supply is in one end only, if you manage to snap it above the blood supply, I was in a cast for 3 months with that.
So you fell.
That's the one I thought. You're allowed to if you want to, you can share it, Hogtie.
That's a pretty good one. I was going to show my son, actually, he's getting pretty good at. Yeah. I was going to show my son, he's getting pretty good at diagnosing fractures.
I must admit, I
He's
do
quite
like
good with
that
elbows.
one.
Here's a question.
Well, yes.
Here's a question: is there how much difference is there between a fracture and a break? Are they pretty much the same thing?
Yeah, same thing.
Well, yeah, they're pretty much the same thing. I think the term fracture is. Well, I mean, break isn't a you wouldn't find it in Mosby's, for example, Mosby's medical dictionary. Fracture is a little more broad than people think because it includes where there's a failure of the structure of the bone. So generally the cortex, you get a split. That's sort of the outside shell of the bone. It's softer inside, right? People know about the marrow and stuff. But but fracture includes that. It also includes things like dislocation. Fracture simply means any interruption to the skeletal muscular structure. So complete tear in a ligament or dislocation, and certainly, actual bones breaking, all of those things would fit under the definition of fracture. And it's funny because I've heard people use the expression, "Oh, I thought it was a fracture, but we got it X-rayed and it's just a dislocation." And a dislocation is the proper name for it is dislocation fracture. But I mean, when people use the term break, they're usually referring to a failure of a bone structure, whereas the term fracture refers to the failure of any of the structure, let's say a joint structure, which would include, your ossification centers and your bones and your ligaments.
I think I was quite naughty with mine because after I'd been in the cast for about 6-7 weeks, I went climbing again with the cast still on. Indoor rock climbing centre with my cast on. And I found climbing easier because I could put the cast over. Better purchase.
Is Fiona breaking up?
Yeah, a little bit.
Often, yeah.
Oh dear. I don't know why. But anyway, I only wanted to come in to check that Hogtie had actually seen that picture. It's taken me long enough to find it.
Well, I haven't. Yeah, I'm definitely going to show my son here shortly when we're. It's a cool image. How did you get it? A lot of places don't like giving them out.
Every time there's been any X-ray, I've always asked to see the X-ray.
Yeah.
They pull it up on the computer screen, and then I use my mobile phone to take the photograph from the computer screen.
Yeah.
Remember I
did that.
Remember I sent you the photograph of when my son broke his hand?
Oh, it's breaking up so badly, Fiona. You're getting maybe 10% of what you're saying now. It's a shame because it's interesting. We just can't hear you.
Try leaving and come back in.
I don't know if I can, but I'll try.
Well, while she's doing that, I'll say, well, actually, it's pretty quick on this platform, but one of the other points I heard go by was about sort of what creates something as theft. And if it had been abandoned property, then he's not really stealing it from anybody. But the thing is that the standard for theft is sort of what was in the person's mind. Did they, if they had any sort of a reasonable belief that somebody else had a claim to this property, So I mean, the obvious example is if I have a quad parked in my backyard, and you've seen me ride the quad, you know that it's my quad, and then you come in and you take it one day. Even if you don't keep it, even if you just remove it from my possessions, you've deprived me of something that you think obviously I have a claim to ownership on that thing. Obviously, that's theft. Even if you don't keep it, it's about depriving somebody. So the issue is, would there be other claimants? So you find a safe somewhere, would there be other claimants? And I think maybe, and I'm actually as MP to make sure I got this right and how it plays out in American law. I'm sure it varies by state to state. But you think of the situation where, let's say I own a store, and Laura comes in, and
Here we go again. Here we go again.
Yeah. You're the baddie.
As Cliff Jumper, you made me a criminal a lot of times now. You're doing it as well.
No, in this case, you're the victim. But you see why I was going to work it in. Because I think last time I used this example, I said Cliff Jumper took some money out of his wallet. So now I'm going to say Laura took some money out of her purse. You see how I'm doing my best to try to play along. You see?
Normally you make me the criminal. This time I'm the victim.
In this case, you're the victim. So through whatever process, something falls out of Laura's purse, like it's a locket or a $100 bill or whatever it is, and it lands on the floor of my store. And you're the third person in the store. You come along and you find this $100 bill. You see it on the floor. And if you now pick it up and put it in your pocket, is it the case that you're depriving a rightful owner, or at least depriving the rights of some potential claimant to claim that it's theirs? And what a lot of people don't realize is that there's actually a whole hierarchy of claimants, with the person who finds it being at the bottom of that list. So first, the person who is the legitimate owner of it, the one who is, rightfully had come into possession of it. And then second, the owner of the property on which the discovery is found. So in this example, Laura would be like the principal claimant. But if for some reason we couldn't identify who it was, the fact that it was found on my property makes me the second in line legitimate claimant for it, with the person who finds it being third. Unless there's a specific municipal bylaw that says, any money unclaimed that's found within the bounds of our city is actually property of the city, which would then put you in fourth position. Now that's a pretty rare bylaw, but the point is that when you find something and you didn't find it like in your own bathroom, there are at least two credible claimants for ownership or rights to that property ahead of the person who finds it. But that all sort of speaks to the reasonableness of somebody knowing that. Like, see, I know this. So if I was in a gas station somewhere and I found something, I wouldn't then say, oh, well, that's God's gift to me and I can put it in my pocket. But it would be very easy to demonstrate that I ought to have known that I'm depriving some other legitimate claimant of their right to make a claim for that money. You have to give somebody else a reasonable opportunity to say, no, that's my property. So I would know that I would be depriving somebody else of that right. So there's a consciousness of guilt in my action of picking something up and putting it in my pocket. But in G-Man's case, I think he could have mounted a reasonable defense that he suffers a mental defect that would prevent him from fully understanding that just because you see something doesn't mean that it's automatically yours. I think that would be a legitimate defense in his case.
But the thing is, can you imagine that if that was presented? Because he'd be sitting, in the offendant's chair at court, and his lawyer would be saying, my client is mentally incompetent on this matter. He is. Could you imagine G-Man keeping his mouth shut for more than 3 seconds?
That's win-win, man.
I mean, we would immediately have 14 woes. And then he would start flapping his lips and then talking like he was a smart, pretending that he was a smart person and that he wasn't an idiot and didn't understand something.
In which case his lawyer could then just sort of give a knowing look to the judge and shrug his shoulders a little bit and go,
See what I mean?
I rest my case.
He's like, the defense rests. It's like,
oh gosh, can you imagine that? He just sort of looks at the judge, shrugs his shoulders, say, defense rests. with a sort of knowing nod. Oh gosh. Yes, G-Man, you weren't convicted because you're an idiot. Congratulations. That would be what his lawyer gets to say.
Yeah, but then he'd just go and lie and say, I was acquitted on a technicality. Yeah, the technicality, you being an idiot.
Well, it's funny because if you guys know the true story of what actually happened with, he got into a scrape with that not-for-profit corporation in Austin, the one that owns the rights to the Atheist Experience. And he had telephone conversations and correspondence with their lawyer. And he tells the story like, oh, I beat that lawyer in 5 minutes. Like he really thinks like he beat the lawyer. And what in fact what it was simply they were instructing to cease and desist copying the material. And they said, look, we're not going to take you to court, right? I mean, G-Man's the shallow pockets here. There's no way that the ACA or their lawyer is going to want to be interested in bringing that guy into court. So they said, look, we just don't want people taking our copyrighted material. If you agree to take the stuff down from the challenge, you tell us from your channel, you tell us you didn't make any money off of it, it's all good, but we need to protect our rights.
Yeah,
and he went, okay, yeah, I'll do that right away. And then he says, he makes it all of his videos where he says like, oh yeah, that lawyer thought that, they really had me, but in 5 minutes, like I beat him. All I had to do was take it down from my channel and they had nothing. And that lawyer just didn't even know what to do. And he acts like that he beat this lawyer when he did exactly what the lawyer told him to do to avoid having any liability for it. Like,
yeah, it's the guy's an idiot.
So I don't know if MP had left us. I was kind of hoping he would clarify how he did. He's not here. I was hoping he'd clarify how this plays out in the States because, I heard him at one point make mention of adherence to common law. And it's a weird thing that's happened. Like, obviously, the UK has very strict adherence to common law, save for occasions where there's specific statute that overrides it or a contractual waiver of some common law right. Canada, a little less so, but not much less. And the common law principle of theft by finding is this hierarchy of potential claimants for something that's found. And New Jersey went ahead and took this common law principle and entrenched it in their criminal code. And so it is a common law principle, but when somebody's charged under that statute, the statute would prevail. Don't ever believe the sovereign citizens, by the way, who say that the common law prevails over statute, because that's not true. The whole point of common law is where you look when there's no specific statute or contractual term that would address that issue.
Yeah, not in sovereign citizens in the States, they don't get very far.
Well, it's really funny how they object all the laws, but then they revere the Constitution. Right? They will insist, and they fuck it up too all the time. One of the things they say is like when the cop asks for a driver's license and insurance and registration, they say, "Well, can that be used against me in court?" I say, "Well, I need to see it." "Well, can that be used against me in court?" "Well, sure. I got to collect whatever." And they go, "No, I'm asserting my Fifth Amendment right to not incriminate myself." Without any recognition, the Fifth Amendment provides protection against compelling a person to provide inculpatory testimony.
Correct.
But where you have an existing statutory obligation to carry and produce a document, like if you've got a gun and your state says you have to have paperwork to go with that gun, you have to show the paperwork. If the cops start asking you questions, well, where were you going with the gun? What were you going to do with it? You don't have to answer those questions.
Right.
But if it's already by statute an offense to not produce documents that you've adopted the responsibility to produce, then you have to produce those documents. You don't have, like, your constitutional protection against being compelled towards self-incrimination doesn't lift you of any other penalty that would apply for failing to produce a document where there existed a statutory responsibility to do so, such as when you're driving, traveling, by putting your hands on the steering wheel and stepping on the gas pedal.
Well, and see, one thing that I don't understand why people can't understand is that municipal granting of license, like by the state authority, is a privilege. It's not a right. So you're operating a vehicle under a privilege. Now, the ID that they ask for, I'm not clear on that. I think they claim when you're asked for an ID, you have to produce it, but I'm not sure about that. But like by saying you're traveling, no, that's false. You're operating a motor vehicle under a privileged license. I mean, that's the thing I just don't get. People say, I don't have to show you, I'm minding my own business. Do I have a right to travel down the street? You're in a car. You're operating a licensed vehicle under a privilege. But that's just me.
Well, you're right. It's weird too when they say things like, well, show me in the Constitution where it says I have to show you my driver's license. Or any other similar phrase where the police officer is acting under the authority of their state statutes. And or as the many sovereign citizens, about a third of them call them statues. Yes, that's statutes and regulation. I was going to say they insist. I lost my train of thought there. Or whatever it is, they'll say, "Well, show me in the Constitution where it says whatever." And the cops acting under the authority and instruction of state statute, and they say, "Well, show me the Constitution something." Well, and the cops never know how to answer this. And the thing is that the Constitution, sets certain limits to governmental power at the Bill of Rights. And there's other things that create certain government entities, and also creates and empowers states, or at least respects the power of states to make their own legislation with regard to things like retail, commerce, and using the roads, gun licensing, all that stuff. So we say, show me in the Constitution where it says I have to show you my driver's license. Well, that's actually pretty easy. It's not a one-step process because you're not going to find it in the Constitution, but you'll find in the Constitution where the states are clearly empowered to make a law, and then, oh, look, here's a state law as authorized by the Constitution. And that state law says that if you're going to operate a motor vehicle, you have to have a license to do so, and you must possess that license while operating, and you must present it upon lawful request from a police officer. But the cops never, the other thing, that's stupid, because one of the things the cops need to learn to say more to these guys is, look, that's what courts are for. I'm not going to litigate this with you while I'm standing on the side of the highway. Give me your driver's license, or I'm taking you out of the car. Get out of the car, or I'm breaking your window.
Yeah,
what they should be saying, a typical Canadian cop answer is when somebody starts arguing with the cop will say, oh, it sounds like you've got a good point there. Lucky for you, we have judges. So, I have good news for you. Like, you clearly have your side of the story. So what we're going to do, we're going to get you in front of a judge. So right now I'm going to ask you to turn around. I'm going to put handcuffs on. You're going to sit in my car. And, I see your point. I'm going to do my job here. But it sounds like you have a really good thing to tell the judge. So let's get you over there, and then you can talk to a judge. Right? They basically use the above my pay grade sort of a response, and then very politely arrest you. Unless you don't want to go with them, then they impolitely arrest you, which is pretty awesome too.
I'm all for the impolite arrests. Those are the bestest.
Hey, Drag, I got over 16,000 wood in the ship, and I'm working on the rest of the thatch right now.
You want me to come touch your wood? Is that what it is?
Well, no, I was just letting you know. Last time you said, I go, oh, I got 1,000 wood. You're like, yeah, that's nice. No, this time I really have like over 16,000 in the.
Okay. All right. Well, I will go ahead and take this off air. Thanks, folks, for watching. I did have to step away and take a phone call, so I missed whatever y'all said for like the last 15, 20 minutes. But I'm sure it was very enlightening because Hogtie's in here and long-winded. Yes, Hannah.
I actually was going over chatting with someone yesterday about the whole Jason Burns thing about the tsunami of penises, which made them laugh amazingly. And I said about how YouTube used to have a limit of 500 characters, and that after they released that, not only did people start putting pictures of ASCII penises all over the place, but Hogtie Champ was pleased because he'd now put a diatribe in the comments.
And I never did. I never went over the 500 character limit on a YouTube video. I'll do it on Google Plus, but I never did on videos. Nobody wants that.
So rest assured, folks, you don't have to read a mini thesis. On that note, thanks for watching. Please donate to G-Man's lawyer funds. I need to be sued. I am a terrible person.
Is there anything in this fund yet?
And
No,
you're
not yet.
responsible.
Not
You're
yet.
responsible for everything wrong in G-Man's life.
Yes, I am responsible for everything wrong. Oh, and I think Shani had picked up on someone talking about pickles, and then associated that with the person Pamela Pickles in G-Man's chat. So someone was talking about that in the Discord. I hadn't watched any videos, but evidently that's a thing. So I'm not sure how she drew those connections. But I don't know who Pamela Pickles is, but they are a fan of G-Man. If you go and look at their like videos, they're a huge fan. So
wow.
Drag. Please get sued. Take it to Judge Judy. Please.
I would. If I honest, I would take it to Judge just because. Just because.
I would love to see that bailiff beat him down.
I would just love to see Judge Judy just vibrating like he's so annoying. Bird, do you have a gun, Bird? Can you shoot him?
I'm just going to be as stoic
She's
as I can.
I think she's in New York. It's not a far drive for him.
You know, it's a good job she doesn't know who Eric Pickles is, who was a British politician, and looks exactly like a Santaran from Doctor Who. That's pretty hilarious.
On that note, folks.
Sorry. No, don't do that. I'm Judge Judy stalker. I can tell you she has homes in Connecticut, and she used to work in New York. Has homes in Connecticut and Florida, but the show is actually an arbitration court run in California. So Dragnet, you and G-Man would get a free trip to Los Angeles.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know Judge Judy stalking was a thing, but I learned something new. Okay, cool.
But she's so awesome. She's so awesome. I'd love that. Bird's like, oh, no, I don't have a gun. All I have is this taser. Well, what are you waiting for?
Do my bidding.
I'm all for it. Get him, Judy. Get him. Fuck yeah. All right. Well, folks, on that note, feel free to hop in the Discord if you're a douche. We don't know you. You're probably going to stay in general chat. Those aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, but, still. If you are a paid Patreon person who funds my activities so I can stay and live off of my wife, then you will be treated like an honored guest because that's what we do. I go to school so I can live off my wife, even though it'd be easier for me just not to go to school and just to live off my wife. But still. Details. Anyway, folks, thank
Bye.
y'all. Have y'all a good weekend.